An O'Reilly Auto Parts gift card is the perfect gift for that hard-to-buy-for person. Give the gift of convenience from O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dove, Chief Librarian Thomas Sena, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dove.
Yes, hello, welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. I'm your master of ceremonies, your co-host for today's proceedings, Thomas Sena. Everybody, welcome. I think I would be remiss, and I think I need to do Jamie do a solid here, because it's very important to Jamie for me to tell you to wipe your feet before you enter the SNL Hall of Fame. I think Jamie would fire me from this post if I didn't tell you guys that. So welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame. Today is our customary end of season extravaganza. It's the SNL Hall of Fame Roundtable. This is the show in which we invite SNL Hall of Fame voters to share their ballots and their thought processes behind their choices. So this is always an interesting exercise to get into the psyche of some of the voters. Previous roundtables, I think minds have been changed. I think people have stood on islands and been, steadfast on who they're voting for, and it was interesting to see. I think we all just gained a great insight as to what voters may be thinking. Friendships were formed. I think rivalries were formed. So we've had some interesting roundtables in the past. It's always nice to get a peek into the mindset of SNL Hall of Fame voters. So with me today is two of my guests for this past season on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. One first-time roundtable panelist, which is going to be fun. I'm excited to hear her thoughts today. So we have two panelists, and for full disclosure, for transparency here on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast, I will be sharing my ballot as well. So it's going to be the three of us sharing ballots today. So I'm not just like the co-host here on the SNL Hall of Fame. I am a panelist today, and I will give some transparency and let you all know my ballot and how I'm feeling about the voting cycle, about the votes this year. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel for today. And I have an icebreaker question too. So I'm going to introduce them. My icebreaker question, I asked this last panel, last roundtable, and got some interesting responses. I haven't asked these two this question, I don't think. So I want to ask which current cast member, not including Kenan Thompson, because that's the obvious one. Kenan's an SNL Hall of Famer. So not including Kenan Thompson, who on the current cast could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday? So that's going to be the little icebreaker question. Get into a little peek into the mindset of our panel today. So my first guest, Ashley Bauer, SNL super fan, my guest for Kate McKinnon this year. Ashley did such a great job. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today here on the Roundtable. How are you?
Good to see you and talk to you again. Excited to be back.
Yeah, this is great. So which current cast member, not including Kenan, that's the obvious one, could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday?
So I thought about this and I went back and forth between two, but I think my vote's going to ultimately go to Bowen Yang. I'm going to have to give it to Bowen. I think he kind of came out of the gate, really with a bang. And he's really been in some pretty epic and memorable sketches already. And I kind of think he's a jack of all trades. And it's rare that he's in something I'm not dying of laughter in. So, I'm going to go with Bowen.
Bowen's like Mr. Charisma. He really is. I love the iceberg weekend update the sketch that he did. That was a really great performance. That's like one of the most memorable things that I can think of that Bowen's done. He's just a very likable person, a lot of charisma. Bowen Yang, Ashley could see in the SNL Hall of Fame someday. That's awesome. All right. So also with us is my partner in crime on the Pop Culture 5 podcast. He also is co-host of the Bigger Than the Game podcast. He's just podcasting all over the place. He's everywhere. And he was my guest for Tracy Morgan this season on the SNL Hall of Fame. So I'm welcoming Mr. Deremy Dove to the proceedings. Deremy, how are you?
I'm good, man. Always a pleasure to talk SNL and SNL Hall of Fame with you guys. So I'm honored to be on.
Yeah, you're one of our go-to guests for the SNL Hall of Fame. Your insights are always so great, so welcome. You've been on for Dick Ebersole, you were on for Adam McKay, and this year for Tracy Morgan, which was an interesting one. I think we did Tracy Justice with kind of a more loose sort of format. I think Tracy would have wanted it that way.
I agree. I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was fun. So who on the current cast, not including Kenan, could you see in the SNL Hall of Fame?
Like Ashley said, it was there's a few who I was going back and forth with, but I went with James Austin Johnson as my pick. I think he really brings. I love the impressions he does, and he kind of fits that mold of like what I think of. I think of just like what you need to make a great SNL cast member. He has that design. I feel I get like some Daryl Hammond kind of feels from him. Like I just really love what James Austin Johnson can bring to the table, and I see him. I don't know if he's going to be like the big star, but he's that person when we have rankings in a few years, it's going to be like we'll be surprised. We're like, oh, James Austin Johnson, he's a Hall of Famer, or he's a top whatever cast member of all time. So he's who I pick as like that future Hall of Famer for the current cast.
I could see that. He's not just so he started obviously with his Trump and Biden impressions, and I think he got hired on the strength of that. But he's not just an impressionist. I think he's filling out a lot of important kind of glue guy types of roles. He's kind of branching out and not just being an impressionist.
Right.
Yeah, he plays the dad role really real well, kind of the everyday. Because I could see like maybe a little bit of Phil Hartman in him too.
It's big.
In that ways. I mean, not like, Phil's personally one of my top 3 cast members of all time. So I don't think James is like on that tier, but I think there's elements of Phil Hartman that I can see in James.
I think he's a glue, like you said, a glue guy, and I feel like especially those if you're listening to the show or you vote for the SNL Hall of Fame, you're probably a big fan. We all know how important the glue people are to an SNL cast, and I think he fits that role very well.
Yeah. What do you think, Ashley? James Austin Johnson's trajectory?
I had to laugh because that was actually who I went between. I was going between whether or not I wanted to vote for Bowen Yang or James Austin Johnson. So I am right there with you, Deremy. I agree. I think he's so versatile. You're right. He definitely evokes, some of the greats in the past. He has that, Tom, you said charisma for Bowen. I think James Austin Johnson does too. He just has this swagger every time he's in a sketch. And yeah, he can play just a side character or the main character. He can do an impression. I was really close to voting for him, but ultimately went with Bowen, obviously, but 1000% agree.
Yeah, good, solid choices. I think I could see in a few years we could be looking up and seeing Heidi Gardner having the Hall of Fame kind of resume. She has talent. She's a Hall of Fame talent. I think she needs to get maybe a couple more seasons, have some more good sketches. She's very good on Weekend Update. I think that's a lot of times where she shines is coming on Weekend Update and doing kind of off the wall, but sometimes relatable characters, Heidi. So I can definitely see Heidi forming a case. Dark Horse is for me, and he's been awesome. I think he's my MVP of season 49 is Andrew Dismukes, honestly.
Yeah.
He has his own lane on the show too. It's almost like a Will Forte-ish kind of lane. Like Andrew, he has a more offbeat kind of sense of humor than a lot of the cast. And I think he's all of my favorite pieces from this current season 49 have been Andrew Dismukes pieces, quite frankly. So I can see maybe Andrew, a little bit of a dark horse, but I wouldn't be surprised if he continues what he's doing this season. We could be possibly making a case for Andrew Dismukes. So those are a couple of people that I wanted to shout out. So how this SNL Hall of Fame voting is going to work every season, the voters have up to 15 votes that they can use. Voters can use one vote if they'd like. I don't know why they would, but maybe that's, they're very hardcore and stringent and they only think one person deserves to be in the SNL Hall of Fame each season. Though from looking at the ballot, that would just mean I think you're an SNL Grinch or something, and you might be shamed if you just come on here and say you're just using one vote. I don't know. So I'm curious, how many votes, Deremy, are you leaning toward using today?
I'm using all 15.
All 15.
All 15. I think there's some easy, slam dunk people to put in. And there's a lot of people who, I don't want to knock the SNL family, the SNL fan base, but I'm just like, why are these people still on the ballot? And this is a shame. And I'm going to stick up for them. I'm going to continue to do it. So I got all 15.
Deremy's going to be an advocate. Awesome. All 15. The opposite of a Grinch. Good job, my man.
Yes.
Ashley, how many votes are you using?
I'm going to copy Deremy again. I'm using all 15. I found it difficult to keep it at 15, to be honest. And there was one that I realized wasn't on the list. And so I had to unfortunately kind of kick somebody off to make sure this person got on my ballot. But yeah, again, a lot of greats, so much talent over the years, and I'm going to fight for them too.
All right, so both Deremy and Ashley are using 15. Coming in, I have 13 locks. So what I'm doing right now is I have 13 on my list that I feel are locks for me, but I have 2 that are open. So I think my goal here, one of my goals here on this roundtable, is to be persuaded, maybe, as to how I'm going to use those final 2 votes. So 13 I have locked in, but you, Deremy, you, Ashley, you could persuade me. You can make the case for maybe somebody that I don't have on my list and as to why they should be in the SNL Hall of Fame. So if there's anybody that's a Grinch, it seems like it might be me more so than Ashley and Deremy, but it's strategic Grinch. I'm utilizing strategery on the roundtable.
Well done.
Yes. So I'm going to name the nominees, and then we'll get to it just to refresh everybody's memory on who the nominees are this season on the SNL Hall of Fame. In the cast member category, we have 13 cast members. First-time nominees: Rachel Dratch, Will Forte, Taran Killam, Kate McKinnon, Tracy Morgan, Lorraine Newman, and Adam Sandler. Returning to the ballot, we have Fred Armisen, Vanessa Bayer, Anna Gasteyer, and Chris Parnell. And their final time on the ballot, Maya Rudolph and Molly Shannon. So that means if Maya and Molly don't get voted in this cycle, they're off the ballot. So I know Deremy's shaking his head. What a shame.
Shame. Can't believe it.
I know. It's the will of the people. I don't know what to say.
That's true.
So for the host category, there's 12 on the ballot. First-time nominees: Jon Hamm, Anne Hathaway, and Martin Short. Returning to the ballot, but not for their final time, Candice Bergen, Jim Carrey, Buck Henry, Scarlett Johansson, and Paul Rudd. Final time on the ballot for these folks: Melissa McCarthy, John Mulaney, Emma Stone, and Justin Timberlake. We'll see if Emma Stone, she's been on the ballot since SNL Hall of Fame Season 1. She just became a 5-timer here in Season 49. We'll see if that helps bump her up as far as making the SNL Hall of Fame. So I'm curious about that. Musical guests, there's one first-time nominee. That's Pearl Jam. Great episode with Ryan McNeil. I love doing that Pearl Jam episode. Returning to the ballot, we have David Bowie, Dave Grohl, and Lady Gaga. On the ballot for the final time, Paul McCartney, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Prince. So those are the musical guests, which is always a fascinating category to me, musical guest. And we'll probably get into that and your philosophies behind musical guests and the SNL Hall of Fame as well. Writers, there's 8 writers on the ballot. First-time writers: John Mulaney. So yes, you heard him as a host. John Mulaney's also on the ballot as a writer. So when we did the draft, I believe it was Matt Ardill who said, John Mulaney's a great host and stuff, but he's also known for a writer. Let's put him on the ballot as a writer too and just kind of see what happens. So Mulaney's on the ballot for the first time as a writer, as is Julio Torres. Returning is Jack Handy, Adam McKay, Paul Appel, Herb Sargent, and Rosie Schuster. Final time on the ballot for Franken Davis and Michael O'Donoghue. So the writer's always interesting again to me. And one producer on the ballot, Dick Ebersole, which Deremy and I did an episode on, I believe back in season 3.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dick Ebersole on the ballot, still on here on the SNL Hall of Fame. So with that said, let's reveal those ballots, those votes. So I'm going to start with Deremy to kick things off. Who's the first person, Deremy, you want to talk about who you're voting for?
Well, I just think you guys did a great episode on this person, and this is if there's the biggest lock or just slam dunk for the Hall of Fame, SNL Hall of Fame, it's this person, and let's just get her out the way because it's just so obvious with Kate McKinnon. I think it's just we're looking at somebody who is a top 10, maybe top 5 cast member of all time we're almost at 50-year history of the show. And someone I heard you guys talk about just a prodigy, and just from day one, you're just like, and for me, I get nervous with that because I'm always like, oh, this person shows so much promise. And you start thinking, can they be a great? But there's so many great names in SNL history. You don't want to put that pressure. But Kate McKinnon lived up to, delivered, and exceeded all these expectations. And when I think of SNL in the decade of the 2010s, she's the first name that comes to my mind. So I figured the number one slam dunk on this list to me, Kate McKinnon.
Yeah, and the most recent cast member on the ballot. This is her season 47 was her final season. And she went through the waiting period for the SNL Hall of Fame on the ballot this year. I wonder if there's going to be some sort of recency bias maybe against Kate because she's so recent, and maybe some people feel like they need to put others ahead of Kate in the Hall of Fame. That's the only reason that I could think of as to why somebody would not vote for her, because I agree with you, Deremy. I think she's a slam dunk. Definitely on my ballot. I assume, Ashley, you were my guest for Kate McKinnon. I assume Kate's on your ballot.
I feel like I couldn't call myself a Kate fan, and my entire podcast should have been thrown away if I didn't put Kate on my ballot. So, yeah, she was actually my number one. I think, Deremy, you and I are we're on the same wavelength. We're twins, we're SNL twins. Yes, so I was going to come out of the gate strong with Kate, too. And, yeah, I was worried about that, too, is she too, quote unquote, young? Is she still too junior? We were kind of talking about, are we putting people up with, people like Phil Hartman and all these kind of big greats? But I think she is up there already. I think she has proved herself to be a name that will forever echo the halls of Saturday Night Live with the impact that she's had. Yeah, and I can't imagine, don't sleep on her just because we think she's going to sit on this ballot for a little bit. I think she deserved it for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I know some people have a philosophy of deciding whether somebody's a first ballot or not. I've always been of the mind, even in sports halls of fame, that if somebody's a Hall of Famer, they're a Hall of Famer. And I don't think there should be tiers as far as first ballot Hall of Fame. And to me, if they're a Hall of Famer, they're a Hall of Famer. And I don't look at them as I don't separate the Hall of Fame into tiers like that. Some people do. I think Kate's, even if somebody does separate into tiers, I think Kate's a quote unquote first ballot Hall of Famer, even if somebody is strict like that. To me, she's almost comfortably in the top 10 all time cast members for me. And I hope as the years go along that people really have an appreciation for what she did on the show. I know there were a lot of maybe hardcore SNL fans toward the end of her tenure who were like, oh, we need some new blood. I'm kind of sick of Kate. And that's unfortunate because we didn't know how good we had it with Kate. Honestly, apparently some people didn't know because she's an all-timer. So that's just kind of where I stand. So, Deremy, I'm curious. I don't know if we've talked about this. Do you separate Halls of Fame in general into if somebody's a first ballot, if somebody's not?
No, I don't have the tier list. I don't do oh, you're on tier 1. But there are in SNL Hall of Fame or in Sports Hall of Fame, there are names that are you can just say their name and there's enough said. And you stand up and you sit down. And there's some Hall of Famers where you have to have a discussion more and talk about it, and you might have some debate. And I understand there's both, but once they're in, there's no separation. You're a Hall of Famer. But there's some where it's in NFL, if I say Tom Brady And if someone goes, really, I'm not sure about him, I'd be like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
And, and Kate McKinnon's like on that level, like where it's like if someone's like, I don't know, I'd be like, really? You don't know about Kate McKinnon? Like, it's going to be a long day. So it's like Kate McKinnon's you just got to say her name and then you sit back down.
Exactly. No, I'm with you. I'm going to suck up to Ashley here and say Kate McKinnon's like Tim Duncan in the NBA. Like Tim Duncan, yes. Ashley's a Spurs fan. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nice.
Tim Duncan is like you say Tim Duncan, it's like, oh, he's like a top 10 all-time great NBA player, like for sure Hall of Fame. Like he's on that first tier of Hall of Famers. So to me, Kate McKinnon's like a Tim Duncan.
Yeah.
Like it's just a no-brainer like that.
Absolutely.
So, and Ashley like did a raise the roof there. So I'm on her good side.
I think my love for Saturday Night Live may be tied with my love for the San Antonio Spurs. It's really close. I'm quite a fangirl when it comes to both. So
yeah,
Tom could not have picked a better reference for me.
Exactly, and I'm jealous you get to follow Victor Wembanyama for the
same here.
How many years? Jeez, so lucky with the Spurs.
I was really happy that draft day for sure.
Oh, I bet. Gosh. So Deremy, Kate McKinnon, all three of us have Kate McKinnon on our ballots. Ashley, I want to go to you. Who do you want to start with?
The next person I had right after Kate McKinnon on my list that I want to put on my ballot is Maya Rudolph. Again, I think she's another name. You say her name and it's no question. The breadth and the depth of talent that she had while on that show, I think was unmatched. And I don't think there's been anyone like Maya since on the show that's been able to kind of hold the candle to what she was able to do. I mean, vocally, she could do any of the, singer impressions and give us either, song parodies. But she could also just really own and commit to being silly and ridiculous. What comes to mind is the sketch that she did with Kristen Wiig, where they're the prize girls on the game show. Yeah. And Kate's, driving around in the golf cart and they're just acting ridiculous. And there's a lot of breaking. And again, I'm sure Lauren wasn't too pleased with it, but you could get these really serious impressions like Beyonce out of Maya, but then also these just ridiculous, ditzy, dumb, physical comedy, throw yourself type of sketches from her. And I think she's definitely, she belongs in this Hall of Fame.
Yeah, well said. I think we've talked a little bit about Maya, Deremy. Is this one of the ones you've been upset about over the last few seasons?
Yes, Ashley. I don't know what it is. We're on the same page. I'm going to say this. I think Maya Rudolph is the most underappreciated, underrated cast member in the history of SNL. And I think it's crazy. To me, I think she's top 10, but at most, I'll give someone top 15, like cast member of all time. I think, and maybe that's like people have that sexist view because we say glue guy, so we think of just like Phil Hartman, Dan Aykroyd. No, to me, it's a glue person because Maya Rudolph, I think maybe the only glue person I think of more than her is a Phil Hartman, in my opinion. I just think, like what Ashley said, the versatility, what she was able to do, how unique she was, where before or since there's not a talent that Saturday Night Live has seen like her. And I think it's a travesty that she's been on this ballot for so long. So absolutely, Maya Rudolph.
Deremy, you could partly blame me for some of that, because I have been one of those people that's a little on the fence about Maya. And I know that's one of the things that you and I probably disagree about the most.
Absolutely.
As far as SNL Hall of Fame. And Ashley wants to throw a tomato at me right now, I think. And I love Maya. Like I love Maya. I'll watch anything that she pops up. Like if she's on a podcast, she was just on Dax Shepard's podcast, and I made sure like that moved up in the queue. Like I wanted to listen to Maya on Dax's podcast. Like I absolutely love Maya, and I landed on why I was on the fence about it in the beginning. And I talked this over. We did actually a relitigation episode with Rebecca North. She came on and advocated for Maya, and I think for me, I think Maya was in the wrong era. I think the type of humor that was around when Maya was on the cast, probably in the early 2000s, I don't think it really fit the skill set that she had. I think she was honestly better than a lot of the material that was on the show around that time. I think if she was on the show early 90s, or even if she got to be more part of the cast in the other golden era from about 2007. I know she overlapped a little bit, but I would have liked to see her move on into like 2012. And, I think she left the cast a little too soon before it really gelled and blossomed. So I just think a lot of the material, a lot of the humor in the early 2000s, I always felt like it was a little edgelordy. It was just weird all around. Like we were in a weird time in the country and just in comedy in general. And I think the humor was just kind of off in the early 2000s. And I think that didn't cater to what made Maya truly great. I always loved watching her on screen, but there was always something missing. But I think I landed on that it wasn't her fault. Really.
But what gets me is like a lot, and not this isn't at you, Thomas, but a lot of people look at the ladies of that era with Maya as like really breaking through the boys club of Saturday Night Live, and Maya was a big part of that. And the other women, to me, get talked about so much more than her, when I think she was the best of those ladies who broke through, which is always kind of weird and conflicting for me, where it's like there was great women on SNL before, but they had to fight that boys club, and then it's like that's the era where it's like, oh, like the ladies broke through, but then they leave maybe like one of the biggest pieces or the biggest piece off that list when we're talking about. We give Amy Poehler love, and like we don't give Maya Rudolph, so it always kind of confuses me.
Yeah, I can agree with that. What do you think about that, Ashley?
Oh gosh, yeah, I can't imagine anybody being on the fence about Maya Rudolph. I think you saw my jaw hit the floor. Because it was. Oh yeah, we talked. Deremy, you talked about the glue person. I think she could have been in every sketch, and she held it together. She always brought something to it, even if she wasn't the star of that sketch or wasn't kind of bringing her main like impressions to it. And again, I know on my Kate podcast, I talked about to me when I think of somebody in the Hall of Fame for Saturday Night Live is does their talent take them beyond the show? And again, look at her. I mean, she's still making amazing stuff. And I see where you're coming from, Tom, a little bit when you're talking about, it not being her fault. I can see that. I think had she stayed and gotten to do a little bit more with like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, she was like kind of in this weird, she wasn't on too long before they left, but then kind of also left herself not long after, like Kristen Wiig and stuff was there, only overlapped a little bit with those. So I think she was kind of a little bit in between where it really would have catapulted her to a little bit more star power had she had a little bit, better chemistry to meld with. But I loved her every second she was on the show. I loved every sketch that she was in. Huge fan of her impressions, of course, too. I thought she was really good at it. I'm trying to I'm a lawyer in my day job, and I'm totally failing right now because I'm like, how do I advocate and convince Tom to put Maya on this ballot?
Well, I will say that she's one of my locks. So Maya's on my ballot as a lock. So, and I think she's going to get in this time around. But I had to have a sort of epiphany as to why I didn't 100% connect with Maya like everybody else. And it was like a Goodwill Hunting thing. I had to look at Maya and say, it's not your fault. And then she's in the SNL Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned now. So I'm righting my previous wrong and putting her as a lock on my ballot. And I think it's going to happen for her. I think she's going to get in this time around. That's just my gut feeling.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think
I will withdraw my objection. I apologize, Tom.
I've apologized. I've done all I think my the right thing here and admitted my error and arrived at a proper conclusion, I think. So Maya Rudolph is on all three of our ballots here on the SNL Hall of Fame. I'm curious. Well, I'll stick with you, Ashley. I'm curious as to who you want to talk about next.
So this is a name that I am shocked is still on the ballot. That she hasn't been voted into the Hall of Fame yet. I got to go with Molly Shannon. Yeah, I think I talked a little bit on my episode about what really made me fall in love with Saturday Night Live, and again, I think there's a few other names from her era that are on my ballot too that I won't bring up yet. But again, I mean, Mary Catherine Gallagher. Just how can you not put Mary Catherine Gallagher in the Hall of Fame? She's a superstar. It's literally on her name.
Well said. Yeah, she's on my ballot. So Molly Shannon is one of those. And that's similar to Maya Rudolph. This is her last year on the ballot. So if she doesn't get in, she's just kind of off the ballot. So I have her as a lock. So that's one of my other locks. Deremy, Molly Shannon. What's your feeling on Molly?
Oh, absolutely a lock. And I agree with you guys. I agree with Ashley. Like she should have been in. I'm always going to give love for those cast members and writers who bridge a gap at a really tough time in SNL history. And I know, like, we all know the stuff like every year, Saturday Night Dead and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but there's certain points in the show's history where it was really at a shaky point and on the rocks. And she came midway through that awful 94, 95 season and stayed on, one of the few people who stayed on and really helped bring in a new transition with that fall of 95, 96 cast. And just the different characters, the way she just jumped into the bizarre and didn't hold back and could, have Mary Catherine Gallagher, but just really brought such a weird, uncomfortable character to the mainstream. And she was able to do that time and time again on this show. Definitely a Hall of Famer for me.
Yeah, that's both of you said everything. I think especially I think Mary Catherine Gallagher on the SNN, they did a character count, and I think Mary Catherine Gallagher finished top 5, I want to say. And that's Molly Shannon's work. Her physicality is something that I think everybody will always mention, probably to her detriment. Like, you watch some of those sketches back, and she probably will even admit, she could have heard, she probably shouldn't have done that necessarily. Like, I bet the producers on the show and writers and stuff are like, what are you doing? Like, you don't have to totally throw yourself through this table or wall. Or so I think she did a little damage to her body, but she sacrificed herself for the good of the show and for our entertainment. And she's just so wonderful. And she has a really great memoir called Hello, Molly. I don't know if you have a chance to read it. I don't know if either of you have read it.
Yeah, I have.
You have, Deremy? Have you? You need to pick that up, Ashley, if you haven't. It's so good.
It's in my to read list right now for sure. I admit I got a little bit sidetracked by some other kind of book talk recommendations that I very cliche got into, but it is downloaded. It is in my queue. I've been dying to read it. And we were talking about her physicality, and I think what I loved about her too is we haven't seen a female comedian do physical comedy to the extreme like Chris Farley did. When I think of extreme physical comedy to their actual physical real detriment, obviously, Chris Farley would chug, I don't even know how much caffeine or espressos to get into that, really hyper mindset, in addition to, throwing himself through walls and tables. I loved that a female comedian would do that. And I can be just as funny as the men who do this. And it's not improper. It's not inappropriate. She nailed it. I think it worked for her. And you're right. She did have so many quirky characters that I feel like other comedians who came after her tried to do. They tried to bring that kind of weird and unique humor, but it didn't really land, or at least I didn't really get it. The first person that comes to mind is Kyle Mooney. I apologize to Kyle Mooney fans, but he was just somebody that I couldn't really understand. I applauded his attempt, and because, comedy is so subjective and there's something out there for everybody. But I think Molly was that weird kind of quirky, as a weird, quirky girl, awkward, growing up. I was like, oh, I feel seen. Like, people can laugh with her and not at her. And that was really, really awesome to see.
Do we have a Kristen Wiig or Kate McKinnon without Molly Shannon?
Yeah, she's a trailblazer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm looking at Molly's trajectory as far as voting, and she started off at 34% after season 1, and she's climbed to 47, 54, and then 57 last time around. So she just needs that last kind of push to get into the Hall of Fame. And with Maya, she started off at 47, and then she's been at 57, 58, and 58 the last few times. So I think both Molly and Maya both hovering around the 57 to 58% of the vote mark. This is their last time. I think Molly's going to get into. That's my gut feeling. as well. I think the fact that I think voters will look at it and say that Molly and both Molly and Maya deserve it. And they've been on the cusp, but they've been so close. And again, I blame myself for Maya. I've voted for Molly in the past, so I'm off the hook as far as Molly goes. But I would love to see both of them get into the SNL Hall of Fame. So we've had agreements on Kate McKinnon, Maya Rudolph, and Molly Shannon, 3 great cast members. Deremy, I'm wondering who you have as far as non-cast members on your
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go next, because I'm like, you know what? Let's just get weird on this roundtable.
Let's get weird.
Let's get weird, and I'm going to go with this person. And I'll be honest, Thomas, have listened to SNL Hall of Fame since season 1, and usually when I'm listening, the conversation's great, and you kind of lean me either way. I'm thinking either where I'm like, yeah, they're a Hall of Famer, or they already you're proving that, or I don't think so, and you're kind of going that way. Never have I been more conflicted listening than to the Michael O'Donoghue episode where you had Brad and Gary on, and I'm driving around and I'm going, yeah, and then right away, then the next someone makes a point and I go, no, he's not a Hall of Famer. Then I'm like, but yeah, he is. And I was just back and forth, and I'm like, I really don't know. And so I thought about it a lot, but I'm going to vote him in.
Okay.
And I can understand if people don't, but I'm going to go there because of when the show started, and because we've been making sports references, I'm going to keep that train going. The Dynasty docuseries just happened with the Patriots, and of course, when you look at the Patriots Dynasty, there's a lot of players, coaches, administrators who are a part of it, but the big 3 headed leadership: Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady. When you look at the first year SNL, the 3-headed leadership, it was Lorne, Chevy Chase, and Michael O'Donoghue.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael really did, if you listen to a lot of people that those first 5 years, Saturday Night Live brought an edge. It was cool. It was hip. It was something that TV in the 70s hadn't seen yet. And who really helped to bring that sensibility was Michael O'Donoghue. And he's also done things, especially in the early 80s, that really could hurt the show. So I understand the negative, but I feel like his positives do outweigh the negatives, which is why I kind of went with he should be voted on. And he was a part of that original crew. And I feel like everyone who was a part of the first season, in my opinion, should be in the Hall of Fame just because you were a part of the foundation and you started this huge franchise that will stay in pop culture forever, no matter how long the show is on or when it goes off. So I vote for Michael O'Donoghue.
It's interesting that you bring up O'Donoghue because I put him on and then took him off. I alternated just so many over the last few days. I was like, nah, no O'Donoghue. And then I would think about what Brad and Gary said. I'm like, well, those are good points. I'll put him on. And then I took him off again. As of right now, he's not one of my 13 locks. And he was one of the ones where I could be persuaded for him to end up on my final ballot. He went, actually, I think Brad and Gary did a really great job of advocating for Michael O'Donoghue because he went from 11% of the vote after season 3 to barely staying on the ballot. He got 35% last year. So that was quite the jump for Michael O'Donoghue. I don't know. It's just I don't know if it's just his persona or some like the edgy, bordering on mean material that he possibly wrote that sometimes rubs me the wrong way, but I definitely grant how important he was to the show. Ashley, it was Michael O'Donoghue somebody that you've been maybe considering?
He is not on my ballot, actually. And it was one of those things where I totally agree with you, Deremy. He was part of that first season. And I do agree with your statement that anyone from that first season, because of what they created and what we have now, is because of them. But again, I wasn't a huge fan of his. Some of his sketches were, I don't know, maybe it's just because they didn't age well looking back at them. But I do have a few writers on my ballot for sure. And he just didn't land in one of my top favorites. So sorry.
He looking at his sketches, so we have the good and the bad of O'Donoghue. He wrote Godfather Therapy with Belushi, which was awesome. He wrote The Last Voyage of the Starship Enterprise, which I think is one of the better sketches of those early 5 seasons.
Absolutely, both of those.
Yeah, those are great. Norman Bates' School of Motel Management was awesome. I even liked he had a weird concept of the attack of the atomic lobsters that was like, I think O'Donoghue's sense of humor kind of reined in a little bit. Then like you have things like the Needles impressionist, where he just said like, here's my impression of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir with needles stuck in their eyes, and he would just like yell. He would like mime putting needles in his eyes and just yell. So it's just kind of interesting. But again, Deremy, he's not like totally off my ballot. It's just something that I have to like keep thinking about.
Well, don't get me wrong. Like, so personally, I agree with you guys. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm like, it doesn't. I mean, there's some sketches he wrote that hits me, and a lot that don't. But I have to take myself out of it and look back on what, for like our parents' generation, what TV was like in 1975. And we look at it like, we look at the late 60s into the 70s, music and movies were ahead of the game, where they reflected what society was doing. TV was dead last. And I think about what really changed TV. I think of, number one, like Norman Lear and his sitcoms, and then number two, like when Saturday Night Live premiered. So like him doing like the needles in the eye, like it's not, I don't laugh at it, but like at that point, TV was so far behind, that was just bizarre to see on television, where you're used to seeing, you know, Green Acres and Mr. Ed, you know, not that long before. And that was like, that's what you got. And then even like in late night, it was Johnny Carson. So then it's like, you're getting this and just this sensibility that's just, whoa, like, the counterculture is taking over NBC for an hour and a half on Saturday nights. Like, it was very different for that generation, which is why I had to take myself and my personal taste out of it and look like that was different for that time.
Totally. No, I agree. I mean, that's why he's still kind of like, I might be persuaded, honestly. He might end up on my list of 15.
I'm trying.
I know. Yeah. You're very persuasive. You do that on our other pod too, on Pop Culture 5. You always kind of like get me on your side now.
Yeah.
So, and Michael O'Donoghue was the first person to appear on camera on SNL. Like,
Good
just
point.
a little like historical fun fact. The first person that we see on SNL, it was Michael O'Donoghue in that Wolverine sketch. So, but Deremy has Michael O'Donoghue. Ashley's probably a no. I'm a maybe at this point. Ashley, you said that you had a writer or a couple writers. I'm curious if you want to reveal one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I have 4 writers actually, and I got to go with my girl Paula Pell. Brilliant, just absolute brilliance. Like, she is my comedy. If I saw her on the street, I might die, just like I would next to Kate and Tina Fey. But I think because we got Paula Pell like in the era of Tina Fey too, as such strong writers at the same time, we got such great stuff out of them. And again, I keep repeating myself, but what they've been able to do beyond the show as well, you know, like Conan O'Brien when he was on, and what he's been able to do afterwards because he had such talent. I think Paula's the same way. And she kind of stays in the, you know, she doesn't really take that limelight that I feel like she deserves. She's kind of, I think, happy to be a writer and not necessarily take those starring roles. But when she does, you know, come in and do even just like a supporting actress, sign me up. I'm going to see it every single day. Any chance I get to see Paula Pell. And again, I think what she was able to do with around that time with Tina was pushing, again, we talked about, Deremy, you said, breaking the boys club, not just for the comedians we saw on TV, but I think that's what Paula and Tina were doing in the writer's room, was they were trying to break up that boys club. And again, say women are funny too, and we can be silly and ridiculous. And I think even bringing in the, you know, the topical humor of calling stuff out and making it funny though, like bringing up issues in a way that made everybody laugh instead of making them uncomfortable. So we could talk about it and kind of understand it and see it. And I think she was such a trailblazer for it.
Yeah, she was one of the minds behind some of the great recurring sketches of that era. She was behind the cheerleaders and other just really big recurring sketches like that. She was like, you definitely felt her voice in that era, and it meshed well with, like you said, Will Ferrell, Sherry O'Terry, and all of those. And she has Girls Five Eva. That's the kind of like the thing.
Oh my God, yes,
that she's involved with right now. Paula Pell, Deremy, I'm curious before I kind of because I have a little situation here with Paula Pell and another writer that I might want to hash out. But Deremy, I want to get your thoughts on Paula Pell.
Oh, she's on my list. That's a slam dunk. Should have been in for a writer. She's the first ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion. I talked about, with Molly Shannon, those who helped really revigorate and save the show in like the fall of '95. We talk about the people on screen. We always give credit to those behind the camera and like the writers. Paula Pell's one of those people. And you mentioned, from like the cheerleaders to Debbie Downer to Justin Timberlake in the Omeletteville. So that's like over different years, she's doing these memorable characters and like writing these great sketches. And just someone, that Lauren trusted, I think Ashley, great point. Like, how huge was it for when Tina Fey became the first female head writer, that having a Paula Pell there? Like, I'm sure that was like a big help. And I just think she's getting this just due now because, like, in the public eyes, because of Girls Five Eva. But like, maybe it's by design. No, she was like behind the scenes, but to me, she's one of those writers who should have always been talked about up there with a Smigel, a Jack Handy, all those people. Like, she's that great. So she's a slam dunk for me.
Yeah, it seems like if you ask somebody who worked at SNL around that time, they would tell you that Paula Pell was probably the funniest person in the building. So that's kind of the reputation that she had. And by the way, if you listen to WTF with Mark Maron, Paula Pell was a recent guest.
Yes.
On, and she was great. She's hilarious. She's so likable. Love Paula Pell. That was a really great interview she did with Mark Maron. Paul is not a lock on my list, and she's honestly one like that I'm not discounting. And I wanted to hash it out because I don't know. I have another writer that might be a little, I don't say controversial, but a lot of people might urge me to put Paula Pell in ahead of him for many reasons. So I want to hash out as to whether I should swap out Paula Pell for this person or if I should add Paula Pell to my list and keep this person. So I want to kind of dive into, I have Julio Torres on my list. And I didn't think that was, I was going to feel that way heading into the season. But then I started looking at the sketches that he wrote and his unique voice. And I know the one limiting factor is he was only a writer on the show for like 3 seasons. But some of the stuff that Julio did, he was behind Papyrus, which we saw a second installment, Papyrus 2 now. The Actress with Emma Stone. He also wrote Wells for Boys, which was another wonderful Emma Stone pre-tape. He wrote a lot of really great political things. He had the Melania moments. Julio had just like such a clever, unique voice at that time of the show. I think he really stood out. He had a really great one with Lin-Manuel Miranda, where Lin-Manuel Miranda played a character that was like, he was in Montana or North Dakota or something, and he called his mom because he was an immigrant that called his mom and was describing like how his life was. So like Julio Torres' voice was just so unique, and to me he was almost like a comet that came through SNL, and he made the show so great. And but he just wasn't there for a long time, where somebody like Paula Pell was. And so I was wondering about like the merits of Julio Torres, in that should I don't know, Ashley, like, should I move another writer, more of a legacy writer, in front of him? Or like, what do you think about Julio's contributions, and then even like compared to somebody like Paula Pell?
Yeah, and not to discount Julio Torres. Yeah, I loved his sketches. I thought they were hilarious. And I don't want to say that somebody doesn't deserve to be on a ballot just because they weren't on Saturday Night Live I don't think there's a requisite amount of time. I think we could, vote somebody in who was in for 1 season. Obviously, we've got some hosts on the ballot that aren't necessarily in the 5-timers club and things like that. But I think, to me, the difference between, like, if we're going to put Julio and Paula together, is not that Paula was legacy because she was on for so long, but because of what her sketches did to, move the show, like Deremy said, taking it out of an era. Like, she came in, I think, right at the right time to kind of rescue a drowning show, and then continue to evolve it and stay relevant and kind of help us, continue to keep SNL moving with the times. Whereas, again, Papyrus, and they just did, part 2. a couple weeks ago is just genius. I think it should be nominated for like an Emmy for a short or
Right.
something. But
Yeah.
yeah, given the two, I really think Paula. I mean, is Julio? Again, I hate to do this, but this isn't his last year on the ballot, correct?
No, and you're right. No, this is his first year actually. So I mean that
First,
plays
I
a
was gonna
role.
say, yeah.
Yeah, that plays a role too in the thought process, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you got to go with Paula. I really do.
Mhm.
I think, and again, Julio he's also someone who continues to write and doing great things for other shows, that we still watch today. And so definitely not to discount his humor, what he did, his sketches. But I'm biased. Like I said, I would
Yeah.
fangirl over Paula Pell in the street. So
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
where I stand.
Yeah, I think Deremy, the thing about Julio to me was like his batting average,
Mm-hmm.
putting it in sports terms, like his batting average was just so high that it was hard for me to discount. Like he did so much in such a little time. Like almost everything that he did was a hit for me. And to me, that plays a big role. Like, is it quantity, or even if he was only on the show for 3 seasons, but his batting average is super high? Like, how do you weigh stuff like that?
No, it's hard. I feel like you could have both on there,
Yeah.
and I think that would solve it. But if you have to choose between one or the other, I would put Paula just because a little bit of the longevity and what she did over different eras. So her batting average was, if you have someone who hit 350 for 3 seasons and someone who hit 325 for 15 seasons, I'm gonna go with that 325 for 15 over 350 for the 3.
Okay.
So it's like if I have to weigh it like that, I'm probably gonna. It's hard because the guy who I look at is I go back and forth between first or second greatest cast member is Eddie Murphy, and he wasn't on very long, but what he did was amazing. So I hear you. It's tough, and I think with Julio bringing that different sensibility to a show and really bringing that diversity and a different mind, that's a great factor for him. But Paula did that too.
Yeah.
So it's it's just hard. Like if you have to pick one or the other, I would go with Paula, but it's a tough choice.
Yeah, so I think all of that weighs into my thought process. I think it either come down for me to Julio or Paula, or you're right. I could just put both of them on. I might have room to do that. It's all, nothing's set in stone right now. I just wanted to hash that out because I think it's interesting. And Julio actually has a better case than I thought. Even like on the surface, you're like, okay, Julio Torres, memorable, talented writer. But then you start looking at his work and it's like, oh my gosh, he might actually have a real case here, like more so than I thought. So I just wanted to hash that out, and I thought that was the perfect time to do it. Paula Pell is one of the other ones where I was like, man, I love Paula Pell, and I was just considering that. So yeah, thanks for here we're all learning something, and we're all kind of like, or at least I'm like kind of getting my thought process in order and maybe swayed a certain way. So yeah, Deremy, I wonder what is next on your list.
Another crime I'm trying to justify or undo on the SNL Hall of Fame.
Came with anger, everybody. Deremy's just like,
I'm just like, geez, here we go. I brought this I think I was on the season 3 Roundtable before, and I nominated this person then, and they're still on here. But we're talking about, because Ashley, you just brought up like host, and we're talking about the OG 5-timer guy. He was on 10 times in the first 5 years. He was the person who suggested doing recurring sketches, to the original cast. Like, hey, you should do that samurai thing again, John. Like, come on. It's classic when they did the samurai and Belushi, by accident cuts him on the forehead, and they're all wearing the bandage. You got to have Buck Henry on here. The OG, the 5-Timers Club is such a known thing in the SNL pantheon. And how do we not have the OG of the 5-Timers Club in the SNL Hall of Fame? He should be a first ballot guy. And because he's one of those people, I think of him and Steve Martin, where people to this day get confused and say they were part of the original cast, because that's how much they are a staple of that show. And so I'm just like, outside of maybe Steve Martin, to me, there's no more important host than Buck Henry. So it's like, how is he not in the Hall of Fame yet? I don't know. I don't get it, but I'm going to do it again. nominate and bring up Buck Henry for the SNL Hall of Fame. Hopefully we get it right this time, people.
Yeah, he's a lock on my list too. And I voted for him in the past. I think he's just so important to the show. He's a 10-timer.
Yeah.
But it's not just the quantity of, like, he was solid. Like, you watch every single one of his hosting gigs. There's a reason why they asked him twice a year to come back, and he always hosted the finale. And it was just like, I think the cast and the crew and the producers, it was just like they knew they were in good hands with Buck Henry. They could throw stuff at him, and he would be great in it. He could lead a sketch. He can just find like a role to kind of hang back and just be a supporting player. I think Buck just is synonymous with the show. I mean, he wrote The Graduate, and he was a great writer, but people know him for SNL. Like, I think that's just, as far as on screen, especially, like they know him as like the guy who used to host SNL a bunch. And I think Buck Henry needs to get in. So he's for sure on my list. I don't know how you feel about Buck Henry, Ashley, if we have to like persuade you, or where do you stand on this?
It wasn't a matter of not being persuaded that he deserved to be on it. I think just because like I said at the beginning of this, I had such a hard time whittling my list down to my 15 votes. And that I have a little bit, my bias is going to show through with my votes of, kind of the more relatively recent, people. I only have 3 hosts on my list, actually, because again, I had such a really hard time with it. So I had to give that spot to somebody else. And I think it was kind of me selfishly hoping that somebody else like you guys would push him through, because I agree I agree that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not against it. I don't think you have to convince me that he deserves it, but you may have to convince me to take somebody else off my list if I'm going to put him on mine.
So a lot of it's like an era maybe kind of thing. Like Buck Henry's a more old timer maybe, and so we're looking at like an era that more so like resonated with you possibly. I will say this: Buck Henry was on the ballot for the first time after season 3, so this is not his final year. He's been on twice before. He went from 23% after season 3 to 48%, so he made quite the jump. So I think this being his 3rd time on the ballot, I wouldn't be surprised. I would be a little surprised if he got in, but I think he's gonna be one of those where it's like he's inching toward there. So you have another couple seasons after this, Ashley, to right this wrong that might be made. So
yes.
So this isn't totally the last chance for Buck Henry.
And I think that was the thing is, there's so many greats from that original era that are in the Hall of Fame already, that it was kind of a shock that he isn't on that list. Because I mean, like, how do we get anywhere that we are today without Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner, these OGs that, again, like Deremy said, started the show. They made SNL what it is. And yeah, you're right. Literally, wrote one of the greatest films of all time, and then we're like, oh no, but his work on SNL, don't worry about, The Graduate, think about SNL. So you're right. I think next year I'll have an updated ballot.
Okay. So we'll check back in next year. I think if Buck Henry was more famous just in general in pop culture, he would probably get in, but he's just like a writer, a movie writer. So he just kind of like is under the radar. But I think if he was a little more famous, like Steve Martin or something like that, then I think Buck Henry would be in. So we'll see. I'm curious to see where Buck Henry lands this year. What host do you have, Ashley?
So I actually, kind of going like a little bit more to an older era, I put Martin Short instead of Buck Henry as my vote for one of my hosts, because again, he's somebody else that I find synonymous with SNL. And again, just that silly, quirky, doesn't apologize for how he is or who he is or his comedy or anything. And even to this day, I mean, we saw him, a couple weeks ago with Kristen Wiig's episode, and just still he made Lauren break. I mean, come on, like how epic is that when you make Lorne Michaels laugh in a sketch? I think that shows how great and how funny he actually is. Every time he's on, I get so happy. But I think because of what he's been able to do, the fact that, he keeps coming back as well. We keep inviting him back no matter what. I mean, yeah, they brought him back for Kristen Wiig. They brought him back for Steve Martin. He's just somebody, again, that wasn't just a glue person, but could, steal the scene and steal the sketch, no matter what he was in.
Yeah, just always a wildly entertaining person to watch, Martin Short.
Yeah.
He hosted 2 all-time classic Christmas episodes. He has 2 of the better monologues I've ever seen. I'm still teetering though. I'm kind of on the fence. He's not a lock for me, but he's one of those where I just kind of wanted to wait and see what other people said and do some more thinking on. So I didn't totally discount Martin Short. He's in that Michael O'Donoghue, Paul Appel range where I'm just I don't know, not a lock for me, but I want to see somebody make the case. Jeremy, where do you stand on Martin Short?
He's a no on my list. I don't have him on mine. I think there is no, in my lifetime, there's no more guaranteed lock to make a person laugh. If I have to pick someone in the world to save my life, Deremy, you can only survive if you pick someone to make me laugh. Martin Short's he's on my Mount Rushmore, probably number 1. He's just that naturally funny. He's the ultimate talk show person, and it makes sense. He's the ultimate person to kind of fill in on SNL and to be there and to come on. But I just don't. I know he was on for the cast for that season, that transition, that Steinbrenner year. I just still don't. When I think of Martin Short, I don't think of SNL with him. I know that's a part of his history, but I'm going to go to movies. I'm going to go to his talk show appearances. I'm going to go to other things. I'm not his relationship with Steve Martin. I'm not going to go to SNL, and I think that's why. But I still do believe he's hilarious and he's funny, and I'm always glad when I see him there. But I don't think of him as a host or as even a cast member. He's one of those, for our podcast, essential people. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't have him on my list, but I could be persuaded to, for sure, but he's off mine.
He had more of a case after I rewatched some of his, at least a couple of his episodes. He had the episode, there was one in the late 90s that was classic. Though his episode in 2012, when Paul McCartney was the musical guest, that's a stone cold classic episode to me as well. And his monologues there were great. So when I watched specifically even those 2 episodes, I'm all right, yeah. He put in 2 amazing performances here. One thing that's interesting about him too is he has another, he in the 80s he hosted with Chevy Chase and Steve Martin, and then he also co-hosted with Steve Martin. So some of his hosting gigs have been with other people as well, where Martin wasn't totally featured. So I could see both sides. That's why I am kind of he's still up in the air for me. But anything to add on that, Ashley?
I think I'm going to steal your Maya Rudolph explanation. And I think Martin Short was, the victim of being a cast member on a time where maybe his type of comedy or whatever the reason didn't mesh with everything else going on. And you're right, he wasn't on very long, and he ended up doing much bigger things after Saturday Night Live. But I think the reason Lorne kept bringing him back was because he understood that maybe the time that he was a cast member maybe not have been the best time to have him shine, but recognizing his talent, his comedy, what he's able to do. And I think that's why I would vote for him as a host as opposed to a cast member. You're right. Every time he came back to host, whether it was by himself or with, the 3 amigos, it makes me wish that he would have been on. And sometimes it makes me forget that he wasn't on longer than he was, because my brain has clicked and associated him so much with Saturday Night Live. And I think too, just his association with all the other greats on SNL, I think helped bring him along a little bit to that star power. But I think even without them, he can stand on his own.
So, and I should say too, for SNL Hall of Fame purposes and how it was set up a few years ago, there are the categories technically. So Martin Short isn't eligible as a cast member because he was only on for the 1 season. That's why he's on host, but it's up to each individual voter, and it's just to what their criteria is. So if they want to count his time as a cast member, that's up to the voter. Technically, it's just kind of his hosting gigs that we're looking at, but that's interesting. As far as, and this is why we do these things, is kind of peek into the criteria of a certain individual. Deremy brought up, Martin Short made his mark elsewhere other than SNL. And so there's all sorts of different factors, but I can definitely see Martin Short. I'm curious. This is his first year on the ballot, so I'm curious to see how voters feel about him. So this will definitely be interesting. Deremy, I want to go back to you for your next pick.
I'm going to go back to another wrong and try to right it here. And it's the first episode I ever did on SNL Hall of Fame with you, Thomas. And I know I'm still going to use this at vote here. I got to go with Dick Ebersole, the man who created Saturday Night Live and who brought Lorne Michaels in as the executive producer and was really like, he got hired like to create a show for, to fill on Saturday nights. He picked Lorne Michaels and they really together like co-created Saturday Night Live. That right there is huge. But then after the first 5 years, when Lorne and the rest of the cast, all those original people left, and they hired Gene Domanian, and season 6 is a nightmare. They're looking at canceling the show. They fired Gene Domanian. What do? They bring in Dick Ebersole to run it, and he has one of the most important conversations in SNL history. He talks to Lorne because he knew no one would help him from the past if Lorne didn't give it its blessing. Lorne gives it the blessing. Dick Ebersole sees he fires everybody, but he keeps Eddie Murphy, Joe Piscopo, Barry Blaustein, David Sheffield, and Blaustein and Sheffield as writers with Eddie Murphy save the show. So that show keeps going, for the early into the mid 80s because of what Dick Ebersole did. And, he saw the talent in Eddie Murphy. He saw that bright, shining star. Gene Domanian had Eddie Murphy on the side, not really doing anything. He's like, we have this rising comedic, the megastar. We're going to pump him out. And, I mean, we got some epic sketches, some all-time great performances because of that. And where would we be? We wouldn't be doing this roundtable, technically, without Dick Ebersole. So the fact that he's still on there, I'm going to go advocate for him because I think it's shame on the SNL voters that we wouldn't be having this talk if it wasn't for Dick Ebersole, and you're not going to put him in the Hall of Fame. So I got to give it to Dick Ebersole.
Yeah, Dick Ebersole, I mean, he's somebody who helped create the show along with Lorne. He helped save the show. So I think he's on my list. So he's one of the ones where he's a lock on my list. I think Ebersole should be. He gets lost in the shuffle because everybody thinks of Lorne as like the guy, which he is. I mean, this is Lorne, ultimately his show. But Dick Ebersole, like right there alongside him at the beginning, and
I mean, he picked Lorne. Like he could have picked somebody else.
Yeah, you're right.
Picked Lorne.
Well, it was Dick Ebersole who picked Lorne.
Yeah.
So great points. I'm with it. Ashley, Dick Ebersole. What say you?
Oh, ditto. Yes, gavel struck 100%. We don't exist. All of the people we've been talking about don't exist without Dick Ebersole. Another one of those. Left Buck Henry off while I believe he deserves to be in it. Dick Ebersole I would not leave off because he's got to go.
All right.
Got to go on the list. Sorry.
Yes. So we're all bonding here. All three of us have Dick Ebersole for sure. I think just his name, like that again, the name factor, I think hurts Dick Ebersole. And I just gobble up SNL books and memoirs and stuff. And Dick Ebersole had a really great one that both Deremy and I referenced quite a bit when we did the episode as well. So you want to learn a lot about Dick Ebersole's career. Fascinating career. Dick Ebersole is honestly like the Forrest Gump of TV.
Yes. Great point.
Yeah,
Great point.
Very much.
He is.
So
he really is.
Yeah, he really is. So Dick Ebersole, hopefully we can welcome you into the SNL Hall of Fame after this season. Ashley, I want to go back to you. You've shared 6 of your choices, so maybe a little one behind. So I want to catch you up a little bit and take another one off your board here.
I'm gonna have to go with John Mulaney
As a host or a writer?
So I put him as a writer.
Okay.
And I went back and forth on this because again, he's somebody we talked about earlier. Can bring him back. He hosted the season finale I think 2 years in a row, and has absolutely killed it. But we have so many great sketches because of him. Before we ever saw his face and knew what he looked like, we got graced with the presence of Stefan in the world. And I know my life is better because of it. Stefan is one of my all-time top 10 favorite characters of Saturday Night Live history. 100%. And so I love not just what he did with Stefan, but anything he did with Hader turned to gold. And I think despite, putting him, on the stage and getting to see him as a host was really good. And I think kind of helped propel him when he started to do his own stuff. But to me, I think his genius and what solidified him to me as being great was his ability to write. Um, Lobster Diner, even I guess as a writer and a host, I know he hosted when Lobster Diner aired, but he wrote Lobster Diner. And so I got to give that. I think that's ultimately what pushed me to put him in the writing category for this vote. Was at the end of the day, I think he's a writer at heart.
And we talk about Deremy, like voices, like a distinct voice on SNL. To me, John Mulaney, it's John Mulaney's voice. And I don't know if that counts for something. To me, it does.
Absolutely. I agree, Ashley. I have him on my list and as a writer because that is what I know him for SNL. That's what I think of.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Stefan. I definitely top 10, but maybe top 5 character in the history of the show. How popular, and it seemed like to me every Sunday morning, people I knew, we were talking about what Stefan, like that sketch, like, and what he did with Seth Meyers. So, and just him being a voice behind that and all the different sketches. And he felt like in his short time, he was one of the go-to writers for Lorne, for the cast. And I think like you said, Thomas, it's him. He has that, it's his voice, what that sensibility he brings to it. So I think, and he wasn't a writer, and I think that's due to just his crazy talent. Same with a Julio, like wasn't a writer for that long because he was just that great and that talented that, Hollywood came and swooped him up. But John Mulaney's a slam dunk for me as a writer.
Yeah, he's one of the ones on the short list for me of like, I'm still contemplating, and I wouldn't be surprised if I ultimately put him in. To me, there's just like, it's a stat class. So to me, it's just like no shame on John Mulaney. He's has some of my favorite sketches. You mentioned Stefan, Ashley. Stefan might be my favorite character of all time. And that's a big, John Mulaney, obviously Bill Hader played Stefan, but John Mulaney's a big reason why. He was behind What's That Name? That's a John Mulaney thing, and you totally see Mulaney's voice in a sketch like What's That Name? There was a one-off called What's Wrong with Tanya that I always go back to. Anna Faris is in that. That's just such like a brilliant satire and parody on Lifetime movies. Recently, 2 seasons ago, one of my favorite recent sketches when he was a host and he helped write was the Monkey Judge sketch, which that just floored me with how creative and clever it was. So he's behind a lot of stuff that I love. It's no shame on him that I don't have him as a lock already. There's just some other people that I have as locks that might be ahead of him. But no offense to Mulaney, but I think you both bring up very good points. So I'm curious to see John Mulaney's on the ballot as a host and a writer. So I'm curious to see how that impacts things. This is his last time on the ballot as a host. So maybe if he splits the vote this time around, maybe if he's just on as a writer, then that'll push him through. But I'm curious to see how that might impact the voting there for John Mulaney. So I wanted to share somebody off my list, and I want to talk musical guests. And I'm curious to see what you two think about musical guests. And to me, if there's one musical guest that should be in the Hall of Fame, if we're going to put one throughout the show's history, to me it should be Dave Grohl. And I think the fact that he's not already in the Hall of Fame to me speaks more of how people view musical guests and their relation to SNL rather than Dave Grohl himself. He's been on the show 15 times as a musical guest with Nirvana, with Foo Fighters, with them Crooked Vultures. He's come on and played with McCartney, with Neil Young, Tom Petty. I don't know if he played with Neil Young, but he played with Tom Petty for sure. Like Tom Petty recruited him, and he was going to be in Tom Petty's band. So, and Dave Grohl's been in sketches as a musical guest. Like he's had memorable appearances, sketches. So I think if there's one musical guest that should be in the Hall of Fame, it's Dave Grohl, and he's not. Paul Simon's the only one. But I have Dave Grohl as a stone cold lock for me. I'm curious. I don't know, Ashley, like what kind of thought did you give to musical guests? How do you feel about Dave Grohl and his place in SNL history?
No, I have Dave Grohl. He's the only musical vote that I have on my ballot, actually. And I felt kind of bad because I think that musical guests are a very underrated part of the show. And when you think of what makes Saturday Night Live so iconic over the years is who they've been able to bring on over these years. And I think that speaks to how important this show is to people and culture. I mean, everybody that comes on I've been watching this show since I was a little kid. I've been dreaming of this since I was a little kid. Everybody says that, when they come on the show. And I think who they get as musical guest speaks volumes to that as well. And the fact that somebody like Dave has come back so many times, time and again, and in so many different capacities shows the versatility. And I love when you get a musical guest and you get that cameo in a sketch. I think that makes the crowd go wild. It gets people so excited because you have this rock star come on and it kind of brings them down to earth a little bit. You see them as a real person, as somebody who's not afraid to be silly, put themselves out there on live TV, sometimes in a sketch that makes fun of themselves. And so now you have that, self-deprecation. It makes them even more likable. And I think there's an art and a science to who they pick. Obviously, their scheduling and agents and contracts and all the stuff that goes into it. But I think when they can marry up a host and a musical guest, I think that can really set the tone and the theme for that entire episode, that whole night. I think when you bring on somebody like Dave Grohl, regardless of who the host is, you're going to get something good all the way through from start to finish.
Yeah, Deremy, he's been appearing on SNL for going on 32 years now. His first appearance was with Nirvana in 92. His most recent one was season 49 in the Nate Bargatze episode this year. He was in a sketch this season. So what do you think, Deremy? Do me proud.
Yeah, he's on my list. He's a lock. I think it's interesting because I do feel like of all the categories we have, the one that is hard to line up is musical guests because to your point, Ashley, it is such a huge and important part of the show and the show's history. And it's also, if you look at like what MTV is now and all these other, it's like the one platform I feel like, you're the musical guest on SNL where like all of America can like really see you. Like no matter like if you're Bieber or Taylor Swift, we're all watching you, which is like, I think in today's culture, very hard to have that. Where it's like, oh, we all saw blank on SNL. Like we don't really have many places to see musical people like all at the same time anymore. So it's important, but I think it's weird because it's like, oh, that shows the establishment. That's a window in time of who was popular. You can look at SNL's musical guest. But I think we think about like you got to have this amazing performance on there to be memorable. And all that being said, Dave Grohl, he has that because if you look at Dave Grohl's career on just with the Foo Fighters being on SNL, he should be a Hall of Famer. Just how many times he's been on. But to your point, Thomas, Nirvana, that was a memorable moment in music history and in SNL history when Nirvana came on SNL. That's when we're like, wow, alternative music has really broken through. It was seeing them overtake Michael Jackson and them being the musical guest on Saturday Night Live. And they gave a memorable performance. So all that combined is like, if there's a slam dunk musical guest throughout the show's 49-year history, it's Dave Grohl.
Yeah, and he's inching toward that line. So he was first on the ballot in season 2, did an episode with Ryan McNeil on Dave Grohl. He had 32% of the vote, went up to 54 in season 3, 55 after last season. So he's inching there. And I think the more we advocate for Dave Grohl as like the musical guest, to me, he's the musical guest in SNL history. People say Paul McCartney, Paul Simon. To me, Dave Grohl is the musical guest in SNL history. For sure. So, and one of my favorite all-time performances was in 2020 after Biden got elected. Foo Fighters performed Times Like These, and I got a lump in my throat when they performed that. Like that was amazing. So he has an iconic performance.
I actually cried. Like I was crying.
Yeah, for sure. It was just like stunning.
And we know that was strategic. There's a reason for so many reasons that Lauren, that they went and picked the Foo Fighters for that. And also you've heard Dave Grohl talk about it, with the Foo Fighter and like the Letterman appearances and SNL. He has an appreciation for comedy and appreciation for what those comedy institutions mean. And I like that he appreciates that. Like, so that also is another, like, for me anyway, another like feather in his cap. Like, he appreciates what this means.
Yeah, this is awesome. I hope Dave Grohl gets his just due. All three of us have him on our ballots. The way we're whittling this down, Ashley, it makes sense to go back to you. So I want to get your next choice.
So I picked, let's see, I'm trying to, because, I know we have a few left. I'm trying to think of who I want to put on here. One of my hosts that I voted for was Justin Timberlake. Again, I think he could have his own best of DVD at this point. He's been on so often. What he's done, not only as himself, when he's hosted and musical guest at the same time, but also what he did with The Lonely Island and his bromance with Andy Samberg. I think it gave us genius. Those two worked so well together, not just in the digital shorts, but I think just with anything that they did on screen. We talked about Paula Pell's sketch, Omeleteville, again, and then how many times he came back and we got all the different iterations of, the wrapping paper but just iconic, absolutely iconic to me. He's somebody too that I think we saw the first time that he was on. It was like, oh, like, should he be a cast member? I remember thinking that to myself, that he could totally come do this every single week. And I think he would fit in seamlessly as a cast member. And I think he had great comedic timing, also wasn't afraid to make fun of himself and just really go all in with whatever they gave him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Ashley, what I thought to myself when Timberlake first appeared on SNL was, I hate this guy. I hate him because he can sing, he can dance, he's good looking, and he's funny, and he's good on SNL. Like, that's just unfair. Like, I hate you, man. And for those reasons, I have him on my ballot. I hate him so much that he was so good on SNL that I put Justin Timberlake on my ballot. He's one of like the picks that was a lock to me. So I'm surprised that Timberlake's not, even just for name recognition alone. I'm surprised that Timberlake's not on. Deremy, do you have Timberlake?
I'm going to be honest with the people here.
Yes, okay.
Last time I was on here, I left Lonely Island off. And people made points,
which was egregious.
It was bad, and then I was like, people were making points, and I'm like, should I double down? But like, man, they're kind of convincing me like I made a mistake, and then I was like, I think I told you afterwards that, and then I'm like, I'm not going to do that again. So I'm gonna be real with you, Thomas, Ashley. I had Candace Bergen on it for my like other host. But hearing the points you made, Ashley, I just crossed her off. Sorry, Candace. I love you. Love Murphy Brown. You're important, 5-timer. But I'm putting Justin on for everything that you said, and I think it's impressive. Like, just to add on, yeah, the duo I think of with Justin on SNL is Andy Samberg, but he's so great in the SNL pantheon that like the duo people talk about is like him and Jimmy Fallon, another great cast member.
Yeah.
I know that's from the Tonight Show and stuff too, but still it's like he's got like 2 like partnerships with SNL like greats here. That's how awesome. I mean, some of his sketches are some of the all-time great moments that in the 21st century that really put SNL on like a new generation's like radar. And it's not the show, it's a different category. I think it means something. I know he's a big name, but for the SNL 40th, him and Jimmy were the first one. They opened it, and that has to mean something for all those amazing, talented people who were in that room that night. That Lauren ultimately went with and Jimmy, but Justin and Jimmy to open the 40th anniversary special. So I righted my wrong. Sorry, Candace, love you, but I'm going with Justin Timberlake. I agree, Ashley. Well done.
Yeah, Candace too. Candy Bergen was somebody who I considered as well. Almost put her on the list. She was one of those like Michael Donahue. I put her on, then took her off, and then put her on, then took her off. Candy, to her credit, she hosted. Thing. Yeah, Candy, to her credit, she hosted maybe the best episode in SNL history. It was a Christmas episode. I think it was the season 2 or 3 Christmas episode. Frank Zappa was the musical guest.
Yeah.
But it was just 5-star sketch after 5-star sketch, and so she has a great all-timer episode under her belt.
She also hosted, like, I think it was like the 5th episode, and it's what many people, like critics, but of the cast and crew who say that was the first episode that established the template for what SNL would be.
Yep.
is like that first episode she hosted. So that's why it was tough. I considered her for all that, but Ashley, I see your law skills because I'm like you got me.
I will say this between Candy and Justin Timberlake, if it makes a difference with voters. So Candice Bergen has one more year after this on the ballot. So she was first got on the ballot in season 2. Justin Timberlake was a season 1. So if he doesn't get voted in now, he's gone. So, and that would really surprise me. So if that's like, that could possibly be a tiebreaker for some people like us who are kind of like Candy or Justin Timberlake, and Candice Bergen has another year if she doesn't make it. So that could be like a tiebreaker too. So much love for you, Candice Bergen, for sure.
Yeah. Love you, girl.
Yeah. Deremy, what's your next one?
So I'm going to go with someone who I go back and forth with, but and I could be convinced to go the other way. I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm just going to keep on keeping it spicy. I'm going to go with the Sandman. I put Adam Sandler on the list. I wasn't sure because I do feel like he definitely gets a lot of love for his name and post SNL career. But I think about him, and we think about like the early 90s, you're thinking, when the first names you're thinking about is Sandler. He's a part of that group that, the bad boys of SNL with Farley, Sandler, Spade, Rock. Like you're always going to think about, and then some of his moments, some of his musical, performances on there, the songs are just classics, and they're still played over and over. And that's his time on SNL, from the Thanksgiving song and, Opera Man, and just memorable moments who I feel like he kind of was like, I guess, another sports term, like a home run hitter. To me, his batting average wasn't the highest, but he can knock it out the park and get you like a big home run, but he might strike out too. And when he strikes out, you're like, golly. But when he knocked out the park, you jumped up and you were cheering the loudest. So it was tough for me, but I'm just like, he did make his mark on the show, and he is memorable. And there's moments with him, there's sketches with him, from Schmidt's Gay and all those different things, like you got to think about. So he's probably the hardest one for me, but Adam Sandler. I'm
completely with you. Yeah, Deremy, I'm completely with you. He's like Reggie Jackson. Yeah. So sports, like Reggie Jackson struck out a lot, but at the same time, like, are you going to leave Reggie Jackson out of a Hall of Fame? I don't know. Like, Sandler to me that's a similar case because his time at SNL probably wasn't as good as people remember, but he left such an impact. Yeah. It's like, I gotta vote for him just because of the impact alone that he left on the show. So that's one of those weird things. He's like on a personal Thomas favorite. Sandler's not that high, honestly.
Same.
But he's undeniable as far as like the highs were super high for me personally too. And just the mark that he left on the show and the impact that he had. Like I have him in there, but for the same kind of with the same similar hesitancy as you, Deremy. Yeah. So what do you think, Ashley?
Again, I'm just going to sound like an echo because I completely agree with you guys. I went back and forth, and not because I don't think Adam Sandler is absolutely epic. One of my favorite comedians of all time. But you're right. I oscillated between, because when I think of Adam Sandler, I think of what he did off of SNL. I think of Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, Big Daddy. I think of all the amazing movies that he made, but his diving board into that was Saturday Night Live. It was SNL. And I think too, he was so unique. I think he was so different than anybody that they had up to that point, that they weren't really quite sure what to do with him. And so there were some just not great, sketches or things that he did. But, if we wanted him to do a song on Weekend Update, he was our guy. And I think that other than Opera Man, or probably, to me, his songs on Weekend Update were more memorable than anything else. Is that an Opera Man? I can't really remember anything else other than Shit's Gay that he really did. And I think that made him a good glue person for some of the sketches as well. But I think what he was able to do after SNL was so much bigger. And so that's why I ended up leaving him off, actually. I know this is probably going to get some people very angry. I could be absolutely convinced to put him back on, though. I mean, that's how it was really, really hard. Only because, again, personally, Ashley, my brain associates Adam Sandler with, his movies and not SNL.
Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question, I guess, to both of you? How do you guys feel? Because I've seen it like go different ways with big SNL fans. When a former cast member comes back to host the show, and let's say they have a really good hosting gig, does that like bump them up as like a cast member, or is that just like, oh, that's nice, but it doesn't really make a difference as a cast member for you?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because now that you say that, I remember when he hosted and he did the tribute to Chris Farley, and I was a puddle of
Speaking
tears.
of tears, I'm
Yeah.
gonna cry thinking about
Oh
that
my
right now.
God. Yeah, to me, that was just, and yeah, Adam Sandler, what a great guy, too. I mean, just an amazing
By
human
all
being.
accounts, maybe the nicest guy in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's what I've
I've
heard.
never heard anybody say a bad thing about Sandler.
Me neither.
Seriously. So, gosh, yeah, maybe I'll put him on. I think, Jeremy, just that one hypothetical question. I don't even think you asked it to change my mind, but I think that question alone changed my
Yeah,
mind.
because I'm glad, because I go back and forth, because I'm like, should that be like, oh, that's a nice little like feather in your cap, but should that bump you? And I've seen some, I know, like with John Schneider, and like
Right.
like that does bump on for like a lot of the people on his shows, like, oh, they had a great memorable hosting gig, and I'm like, should that matter, like, for affect your cast member career? And
Right.
I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. I'm not sure, to be quite honest. Like, does that matter? Like, does that affect it or not? Like, I don't know.
I used to think that I used to completely separate it. So like I used to just only be the type that would just look at Sandler's cast member career and that was it. I've been persuaded more so by like people like John Schneider, who he does take more of a wide lens look at the person's contributions to SNL. And so he does take a look at their hosting gigs. So I think I'm inching more towards John's side, but I'll say this, I think I might add a few points if it's a good hosting gig, but I won't subtract from a bad one, because
I like that. Yeah.
I have somebody who's on my ballot as a lock who quite frankly had a terrible hosting gig, in my opinion. But I don't dock points for that. I only add points for like a really memorable hosting gig. Like Kristen Wiig, not like she needed to be her points added for her in my mind, but her hosting gig here in season 49, to me, that's like one of the best episodes in years.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that episode.
Agreed.
And so that adds maybe some points in my mind for Kristen Wiig. Not like she needs it. SNL Hall of Famer, all-time great. But like to me, that adds a little something to her.
To your point, I look at like when Eddie Murphy came back, like I think that was Christmas 2019, like right before COVID, and he hadn't done it in a year, and he was phenomenal, and like that was like amazing. But then the other side of it, God rest his soul, when Chris Farley hosted, like it wasn't good, but I don't hold that against him at all. Like it doesn't dock him, but like he's an all-time great who had not a good hosting performance, and we know why, but it's like I don't ever think about that and be like, well, is Chris Farley that all-time great now because of that bad? Like, no, it doesn't matter. So it's like, to your point, yeah,
because I thought Sandler's hosting gig was really good.
I thought
it was a strong episode, aside from the Farley song too. Like I thought there were a lot of really strong sketches that night.
Eddie Murphy called him to get because since Sandler hadn't done it in so long, Eddie called him for like advice, because then Murphy did it afterwards.
Well, and I think what your question kind of triggered in my memory, Deremy, was, like he did have such a huge impact on the show because he had that relationship with Farley and he had that relationship with Spade, and kind of he really did become part of that group. And even though his humor may have been a little bit different and maybe his sketches didn't always succeed like some of those other guys did, but he really was embedded. And I know I talked about in my episode too about, he was part of what helped me fall in love with SNL, at that age when I was a kid. But, I was looking at my ballot, I was trying to be clinical. I wasn't trying to totally vote just based off Ashley's heart. I was trying to, think of certain factors and everything. And like I said, I kept going back and forth. But I have been convinced, Deremy. I will give you an honorary law degree.
I appreciate that.
You have lawyered the lawyer.
All right. That made my day. All right.
That's awesome.
That's
all
awesome.
Right. So Adam Sandler, a lot of really good discussion on the Sandman. Ashley, who's the next one that you would like to talk about?
So the next one that I want to talk about is Rachel Dratch. And again, noticing a theme, kind of these like quirky female comedian characters. Um, I think of, I was obsessed with Sully and Zazu, the characters that she did with Jimmy Fallon, the Boston teenagers. That was probably one of my favorites during that era. And of course, I know we talked about Debbie Downer earlier. That just goes without saying. Such a genius concept and executed so perfectly by Rachel Dratch. And I think she was a little bit, to me, like Kate McKinnon, and they gave Rachel a lot of like male impressions to do, because she did have that kind of that unique look about her. But I think also because she was so versatile in her comedy, that she was able to do so many different things. Anything they asked her to do, she did it and she nailed it. In addition to having her own characters that go down in history as some of the all-time greats. And I actually saw Tina Fey and Amy Poehler do their stand-up this last year, and they brought Rachel on as a guest, and they recreated some of the Weekend Update stuff that they did together. And again, it sounds like I cry 24/7. I promise I don't, but there were tears during this show as well, just because I was like, I feel like a kid. This is just evoking so much happiness. And I think that reminded me of just what the impact she had on Saturday Night Live when she was there.
All right. Yeah, Rachel Dratch. Deremy, how do you feel about Dratch?
I mean, I do love Rachel, and I love all Ashley's points. I don't have her on, and it's not that I don't think she's a Hall of Famer. It's more like there was just so many, like you said, Thomas, earlier, it's such a tough class that I couldn't put her on this year. But it's not that I don't think she is a Hall of Famer. I do think she is that. I just couldn't get her on over some other people this year. But every point Ashley made is dead on, and like if she gets in, I'm like happy. I'm not like, how does she like? But I just on my list couldn't bump her over some other people on here.
No, I'm the same way. Like, it's no offense to Rachel, that's why I don't have her on. I could see myself voting for her in future seasons. Definitely, depending on how the ballot shakes out. A Hall of Fame talent, for sure. Very memorable. I think you said that she was given a lot of male roles and she really excelled in them. One of the ones that comes to mind is that old movie producer, Abe. What was his name? But yeah, but Rachel played that so well. Of course, Debbie Downer, and Sully and Zazu and all. So they were just she was just really important part of that cast, like part of the rebirth of the rejuvenation of SNL around that time. Don't have her on my list, but I think that's a solid choice. It's an understandable pick, and I can see myself voting for her down the line. This is her first year on the ballot, so
yeah, and I can see, I think it's maybe she was my Kyle Mooney, or maybe not a lot of people got some of her comedy too, and so shout out to the Mooney fans who probably hate me now, but yeah, I can definitely appreciate, like I said, comedy is so subjective, and I think that's what's so wonderful is there's something out there for everybody. And yeah, she's one that I wouldn't be mad about because I can get.
Yeah, all those Mooney bros are going to attack us now, Ashley.
I know, I apologize.
Thanks for that. You sicked them on us. So it looks like we each have 4 left, so I'm curious to see what kind of overlap there is, and by my count. So I'm curious to see what the overlap is and whatnot. Deremy, what's the next one you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Let's keep it going. Let's get weird again. I'm gonna go with somebody who I feel like probably won't get in, but if I have this platform to talk about this person, I will. I nominate Herb Sargent.
Oh yeah, interesting.
And I put Herb Sargent out there because one of the OG writers, and you guys already know how I feel about everyone associated with being there from the beginning, came up with the name Not Ready for Primetime Players, which, important in the SNL history. Also, Weekend Update. How much do we associate Weekend Update? A lot of people I know who aren't even SNL fans, but like Weekend Update. And that's been throughout my entire lifetime. They don't like the show, but they'll watch that part. Weekend Update is such a key factor of it, and he was big in creating it and really executing that. Chevy Chase worked hand in hand with Herb Sargent and Herb made sure all the news stories, the real ones, were in there, plus also like the goofy ones. And then once Chevy left, he kept that with Jane Curtin and Aykroyd and Murray, and then even it got revitalized with Dennis Miller. He was a part of it. A lot of those writers, which I thought was cool to Lorne's, him picking out those writers in the early days, they weren't typical sketch writers. They were, had some lampoon background, or they were just different. He liked their sensibility, and it was Herb Sargent as that veteran writer who really had to break down step by step of how you write a sketch to them and teach them, they all got there in July of 75, and then they went on the air in October. So in that time, he's really being because he was much older than those guys, including Lorne, to really show them how to write sketch and how to be a comedy writer. So I just think his importance to the show, his importance to being a mentor to the writers, his importance to creating one of the most, if not maybe the most iconic sketch in SNL history with Weekend Update, I nominate Herb Sargent.
Yeah, the adult in the room. He was that voice, the steady hand, the veteran, the adult in the room that the original cast and writers needed. Maybe in a lot of ways they might have been a little aimless with that, but I think he helped focus, harness their creative, youthful energy to something productive. I think
was
that
very
was
patient, is what everyone
very
said.
patient man. Yeah, and he took a pay cut. He didn't get paid what he was worth because he had so much experience, but he did that as a favor to Lorne, taking a pay cut like that to be on the show. So I don't have him as a lock. He's honestly one of the handful of folks who I'm still mulling over. Ashley, what kind of consideration did you give to Herb Sargent?
He didn't end up on my ballot either. Deremy, you made an awesome point again with, we wouldn't have Weekend Update it without him. So that's kind of making me rethink it a little bit. But, I had a couple other writers on my list that I think ultimately took the cake. And I think had the earlier years of SNL had the media presence or the media accessibility that we have today, I think that would make a lot of these producers and writers and the staff and the crew behind the scenes way more accessible to us to know who they are. Where now we can name writers by name, we can name their sketches, we can follow them on social media. They're so much more accessible, and I think that kind of keeps them in the forefront of at least my mind a little bit more than some of these older guys. But yeah, definitely gave him good consideration. Ultimately left him off my list. I 100% agree that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, though, because you're right. I mean, Weekend Update is SNL. SNL is, those are just synonymous things. I can't imagine SNL would ever get rid of Weekend Update. I think people would riot and revolt as they should.
Yeah. And if anybody has if they want to go listen to our episode on Herb Sargent, John Schneider and I go back into the archives. John Schneider was my guest for Herb Sargent. He laid out a really good case for Herb Sargent. I developed even more of an appreciation for Herb Sargent after doing that episode. So Herb Sargent, let me see here as far as Herb Sargent's where he's kind of landed on the ballot. So this is his third time on the ballot. He went from 11% in season 3 to 21%. So probably a bit of an uphill climb, but we need people like Deremy to kind of to kind of pound his fist on the table to make a drum for him. So we'll see what happens with Herb Sargent this season. I want to go to one of my choices. I have 3 cast members and 1 writer left on my ballot. And I want to talk about one of the cast members, and one that I might be good chance that I'm on an island with this person, but I think it's one of the more underrated cast members in SNL history. If you look at their body of work, it's pretty striking. It's a Hall of Fame resume, in my opinion, but this person might not have a Hall of Fame name. And I'm going to advocate for Vanessa Bayer to be in the SNL Hall of Fame. If you look at her list of sketches, if you go chronologically, she did Miley Cyrus, she did Jacob the Bar Mitzvah Boy on Weekend Update. She and Cecily with the ex-porn stars. She did Rachel with Friends. There was I know you don't love Kyle Mooney, but she had a classic Kyle Mooney sketch. It was called Awkward Flirts. The Totinos trilogy. Vanessa Bayer totally made those Totinos trilogies She did Santa Baby with Ryan Gosling, which is still like a stone cold, I think, like Christmas classic. She ended her tenure with the Weather Girl, Dawn Lazarus, on Weekend Update, and she filled in the gaps in between. She was like that steady hand. She could be the lead of a sketch. She can be the glue person in the sketch. I think she put in her tenure. She put in enough years at SNL. But I just think like she wasn't. I think she got a little lost because she worked with Kristen toward the end of her tenure. Then she worked with Kate and Cecily in 80. So I think Vanessa Bayer probably got lost a little bit in the shuffle. But I think if you look at her resume, to me, it's pretty striking. And if you think back at what she did, I think Vanessa Bayer, honestly, is a SNL Hall of Famer. I have her in my top 25 to 30 cast members of all time, and I think that's Hall of Fame territory. So am I on an island on this? Like, Ashley, what do you think of Vanessa Bayer?
Oh, she's on my list. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I cannot see a Swarovski crystal store out in real life and just not start cracking up. Like my poor husband, every time we're walking and I see one of those, we're not porn stars anymore. It's just, one of my favorite things that she did of all time. Yeah, you're right. I think she's underrated. I think she was a dark horse, and she could go from kind of the same thing, like these really silly, characters to the Santa Baby, where she turns into this kind of serious, creepy, could start a fight in the middle of the sketch type of person. And sorry, I'm just
not her update appearances.
All of the amazing,
yeah. To me, she could do it. She could do it all, and to me, it's just name recognition that probably holds her back because other people on the cast got more shine. But I just love Vanessa Bayer. I'm biased. Vanessa Bayer, quite frankly, is one of my two favorite cast members ever. So I'm pretty biased here. Deremy, I don't know. Should we like slow our roll with Vanessa
Not at
Bayer?
all on my list.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm pleasantly surprised by this.
And honestly, you said my point that I was going to make this. She's, I'm going to keep that sports comparison going. She's Scottie Pippen. She played with MJ and Kate McKinnon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad Kate was there, but I think if Kate wasn't there, Vanessa Bayer would get that recognition that, we're talking about. She'd be more known. But she was just, you can't blame anybody. She was next to an all-timer with Kate. And so I feel like that kind of overlooks it. So it's like that MJ and Pippen. But, MJ, did a lot of great things, but the all-around person was Scottie Pippen. And I think Kate was the slam dunk, but the all-around person in that time to me was Vanessa Bayer. She could, like you said, could do everything. So I feel she's a slam dunk Hall of Famer. I think if it wasn't for Maya Rudolph, you can make the case that she's like been the most overlooked or underrated cast member. I still have Maya over her as in that top seed for that, but hopefully that changes. But I think Vanessa just had the misfortune of being next to a top 5 cast member in Kate McKinnon.
I think we all just became best friends. I'm so pleasantly surprised by this. I thought I was going to be on my own lonely island, as it were, like with this. But yeah, so this is awesome. So Vanessa Bayer, surprisingly enough to me, on all 3 of our ballots, she got 33% of the vote last year in her first time, which to me wasn't bad, honestly, for her first time out. Like I wasn't disappointed with that. I thought people would gloss over her name and she would get like 10% of the vote or something. But 33%, like 1 in 3 people voted for her for the SNL Hall of Fame. So let's up those numbers. But I think I'm pretty encouraged, and I'm encouraged by what you two said.
She has a cult following, I feel like, and especially what she's done. She's still like with different podcasts. She's still out in people's minds. So I feel like she's not as overlooked as you would think, but she doesn't get the recognition, like to your point, that she should. But I'm not surprised that I think that's a good number. Like where I'm like, I think enough people don't know her, but it's more than what you would think with her.
And she has a good podcast, with her brother Jonah. How Did We Get Weird? So go listen to that. Vanessa's really good. Ashley, I want to go to you. It seems like how many do you have left? 3? Did I lose count?
I lost count too, I admit, because I kind of I didn't write like numbers. I just kind of wrote a list.
Okay.
So I'm trying to make sure I don't repeat. So I had Vanessa Bayer. I I also had Fred Armisen. He is on
Okay.
my ballot. Fred is somebody to me, I think too, at first was kind of this silent assassin. Like he wasn't, kind of in your face like some of these other comedians are. And I think it kind of took a few seasons for him to kind of be like, oh, like who's this Fred guy? Even I admit that some of his sketches weren't necessarily gelling with my type of humor. Some things that I didn't really get, but I could appreciate it for what they were, and what his talent is. One, his impressions, his voices, his musicality, the glue that he always is holding sketches together. But also, he would kind of team up with some other people as well. I feel like he and Maya Rudolph played off each other really well for a while, especially the Beyonce Prince, impressions that they would do. And yeah, I would call him the silent assassin to me. I feel like, he isn't someone that you would readily think of necessarily, but he was on for a really long time. And I think not just because he kind of was like hiding in the shadows and not trying to ruffle feathers. I think it was because he just kind of had that subtle humor, that was still very powerful at the end of the day. And I think I would be remiss if I were to talk about, who I think belongs in a Hall of Fame, for SNL and not say Fred Armisen's name.
Okay. Yeah. Deremy, Fred Armisen.
He is on my list as well. And I think Ashley made a great point in the fact that he's someone who, not that I'm ever going to make it or try out for SNL, but a lot of times I'm like, well, that doesn't fit me because, yeah, when I see these people perform, they're very like loud and they have these over the top characters. And I love what she said where he was subtle, he was quiet. And that kind of, I like the people who like, you have to kind of like watch, like they're not just in your face. And I think pre-Fred Armisen, I kind of thought, well, yeah, you got to have to be like, as a performer, in your face and loud. But he was very subtle, very quiet. His versatility was unique and different. And I'll also say this, and I could be off, but just from, he brought, people talk about like alternative comedy and like different waves of it. I feel like he brought a new wave of alternative comedy to SNL, like with what he was doing and his sensibility. And it was like that hipster kind of, I know he did Portlandia, but I feel like he really did bring that hipster into the late 2000s, 2010s comedy into Saturday Night Live. And so for everything that Ashley said and for all that, I had to put Fred Armisen on there.
Okay. Fred, I've struggled with Fred a little bit over the years. To put it in the batting average terms, for me, his batting average wasn't as high as a lot of other great cast members. I know he was important to the show, but maybe not as important as someone like Adam Sandler. So I couldn't give as many legacy and impact points to Fred as I did someone like Adam Sandler. So I don't have Fred on my list. He's one like Rachel Dratch where I could see voting for him. Like ultimately, like this is his second time on the ballot. So he does have a little bit of time. He's one where depending on how the ballot shakes out, I'll look and be like, yeah, dude, I think Fred is a Hall of Famer. And I think he does like have ultimately, I think he has a Hall of Fame impact. I think he does have like the highs were there. Like he has high highs as far as sketch goes on the show. He couldn't jump a lot of the people here on my ballot now. But quite frankly, there's probably more than 15 deserving Hall of Famers. So that's why this exercise might be a little tricky. And Fred's an example of that for me, which if you put a water gun to my head and was like, is Fred Armisen a Hall of Famer? I'd be like, yeah, Fred Armisen's a Hall of Famer. Just maybe not right now because of how the circumstances. But you both bring up really good points. And I expect Fred to get in at some point. Again, he got 51% of the vote his first time out. That leads me to believe that his trajectory is Hall of Fame at some point. So Fred Armisen, both of you, it's a no right now for me. I want to go on my list to another cast member, somebody they called the Iceman, because he never broke. He was always a steady hand. And I think he's, again, like a very underrated glue guy type of person, but he could also play very like wacky. He had no shame, put himself out there. Chris Parnell, to me, I have on my list. I definitely think Chris is a Hall of Famer. One of the few Hall of Famers. Well, I guess no, because Farley and Sandler got fired, but Chris Parnell got fired too. But then they brought him back at the urging of like Will Ferrell. You have like, in my opinion, the greatest of all time. is telling Lauren, hey, we got to bring this guy back because Chris worked so well with everybody on the cast. And he was part of so many just great moments in the show. He was part of Lazy Sunday. He was part of all these like iconic things. And Chris Parnell was like, he had a thankless role in a lot of ways on SNL, where he was so good at sketch that they just sort of like handed him things that they didn't feel comfortable with other cast members maybe doing because he was such a steady hand. I just think just looking at Chris Parnell's work and his role on the cast, I had to put Chris Parnell in. Dave Buckman, who does sketch in Austin, he was my guest for Chris Parnell, and he really made a great case for Chris Parnell. So a little to my surprise, I looked at the list and I said, I'm putting Chris Parnell in over Fred Armisen, surprisingly enough. But I do feel like Chris Parnell's sketch work is just like really underappreciated and really great. So Deremy, Chris Parnell, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, he's not on my list.
Mm-hmm.
You always hear a debate for Hall of Fames, the Hall of Fame or the Hall of Very Good. I'm going to put Chris Parnell in the Hall of Very Good. I like Chris Parnell. I do think he was a glue person. He was a part of Lazy Sunday, which is iconic and a memorable sketch in SNL history. I just think, talk about great glue people, like he's not my Rudolph. I don't think he's not Fred, where Fred brought a totally different sensibility, I feel. Where, like, for me, Fred's not personally like, haha, but Fred brought something that, like, oh, this is a new type of comedy that's out there that people are gravitating toward. And maybe it's not always for me, but, like, he's bringing that to the mainstream in a way with, like, what he's doing on here. And so that's where, like, I hear you. I probably maybe laughed more times at Parnell than Fred, but I will give Fred that. Parnell is I like him but I couldn't put him on the list. But he's someone, because that episode you did was very good, like that's about him. I could be persuaded. I maybe need to like reevaluate, but like we've been saying, the list is tough. It's a great cast or a great class. I have him off, but I definitely could be persuaded. I'm not like locked in stone. Like he's definitely not. I'm just right now, I'm not quite there with him.
It's not like a laughable thing.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Ashley, Chris Parnell was part of an era that I know that you really love, that's near and dear to your heart. Chris Parnell was like smack dab in the middle of a lot of that. What do you think about Chris Parnell?
He made my list. Yeah, you're right. That was, one of my favorite eras for sure. And, even, we talked about Lazy Sunday, and of course I'm a huge Lonely Island fan. And, even they say that like they were afraid to kind of do what they did, and they invited, because, shout out to their podcast as well with Seth Meyers, that they asked Chris Parnell to be in Lazy Sunday because they didn't want to step on his toes of the fake rap, of the comedy rap, that ultimately they knew that was his kingdom. And they were just happy to be there and be involved. And I think that speaks volumes to, the genius to me that is Lonely Island, looked at Chris Parnell like that and recognized that, he was the one to do it first and to do it well. And I think you got so many great things from him. The versatility, his voice, I think we were talking about Mulaney's voice is so recognizable. And to me, Chris Parnell's is the same way. I'll just be watching TV and randomly hear a commercial and say, that's Chris Parnell's voice, 100%. And I just really appreciate everything he brought to that era. And you're right. Will Ferrell, like the Will Ferrell saying, no, this guy he needs to come back. And I cannot imagine SNL in that era without Chris Parnell.
Yeah, definitely. There were a couple of things, like he did some kind of alt comedy on SNL around that time, like some weird, Chris Parnell could dabble in like the oddball weird stuff. Like he was in the Dr. Beeman sketch with Will Ferrell. Well, Will Ferrell played that just ridiculous doctor. It was such like nonsense, and Chris Parnell played the perfect role. He kept it together. He was kind of that steady hand amidst nonsense. And then there was one that he did with Christopher Walken, where Chris Parnell played a like, what do you call a half man, half horse? Why am I blanking on this? But
like a centaur?
A centaur. Yeah.
Or
So Chris
Minotaur?
Parnell
I
played
don't
a
know which one is
centaur.
which.
Yeah. So it was a centaur. So Chris Parnell played a centaur that was interviewing for a job with Christopher Walken. And Chris Parnell was just played that role so well. It was so odd, even for the time on SNL in the early 2000s. So those are just some of the one-offs. And if you want to see like alt comedy and stuff, like I think Parnell, those were two examples of it.
I
for
mean,
me.
how huge was he? I mean, this may make me sound like a hypocrite, but and maybe the most famous sketch of all with More Cowbell, like
More Cowbell. Yep.
he was huge in playing off of Will Ferrell in that and being that like adversary role. Like he played that part very good. Like, which I mean, obviously Will Ferrell and Christopher Walken stripe it and just kill it, but like having Chris Parnell to be that guy and that, like you said, didn't break where everyone else was breaking. Like,
yeah, you needed the Iceman there,
Yeah.
especially with Jimmy Fallon right next to him. You need the Iceman to like ground
and
stuff
Horatio.
a little bit. And Horatio, yeah, geez.
Yeah, both of them break it. So like it was just him. You know, I mean, I think my favorite part of that sketch is, you know, when he complains to Chris Walken, he's like, you know, just tone it down a bit, and then Will Ferrell just coming right up to him and playing it so slow, like in his face, and then they have that like, come on, Gene, like it's just classic. So I mean, he is a part of like, you could say maybe the most iconic sketch in SNL history.
Yeah, a couple of them, that and Lazy Sunday. Yeah, so good point, Deremy. Thanks for making my point.
Yeah, I'm a team player.
Yes. So we're almost to the finish line. By my account, you both have one left, and I have two. So I'm going to take one of mine off the board, and it's going to be a writer. And I'm going to advocate for Jack Handey. He's one of my last off my list. He's one of my locks. We talked about Paula Pell in her time, people saying that she was the funniest person in the building. That's what people said about Jack Handey in the late 80s and early 90s. You have people like Conan O'Brien and Robert Smigel and Jim Downey saying that it was Jack Handey who cracked us up and made us laugh, and he was a writer's writer. And we talk about voice too. Like Jack Handey, you knew it was Jack Handey, and not just because his name was on the segment, but because he had that oddball sensibility that you're like, oh, that was a Jack Handey. Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. That couldn't have been anybody else but Jack Handey doing something like that. Toonsis, the driving cat. That was a Jack Handey. Deep Thoughts, I think Deep Thoughts alone might get Jack Handey into the Hall of Fame for me. When I was a kid, I didn't think that was a real person. I thought Jack Handey was a fake name because it sounds vaguely dirty to a kid's mind, especially. So I thought that was like Al Franken or somebody writing under a pen name. And then I found out that Jack Handey was a real person. I started delving more into his comic sensibility and other work. And I'm like, this guy's a genius. And I think just for Deep Thoughts alone, Jack Handey might be a Hall of Famer. But then when you look at some of the other sketches that he was behind and a part of and the distinct voice that he brought to SNL, to me, Jack Handey's a Hall of Famer. So Deremy, I know you're very into advocating for writers and whatnot. Where do you stand on Jack Handey here?
I'm glad I figured somebody would say, so I couldn't get him on, but he's definitely a Hall of Famer. So I'm glad you kind of did me a solid and advocated, because there was just some other writers who I felt got more disrespected or not represented, so I put them on. But Jack Handey, everything you said, absolutely. Just his sensibility, what he brought, especially to that era that he was on. So he didn't make my list only because I was hoping, and I'm glad that somebody else would nominate him, and I could be like, thank you. So he didn't make my list only because of I only have 15 to pick from. But Jack Handey is a Hall of Famer for sure.
And it could go 50-50, and that's reflective in the voting because he's been hovering around 50% for 3 cycles now. So that's not a surprise to me. Ashley, where do you stand on Jack Handey?
So, I mean, pretty much everything you said, Tom, for Jack Handey is what I was going through my head when I was looking at Jack Handey. I mean, again, Toons is one of my favorite sketches of all time. Like, I get the giggles, like uncontrollably cannot control and stop laughing every time I watch a Toons sketch. But again, it was getting hard because, I'm torn because I had Jack Handey and Adam McKay as 2 writers that I kept going back and forth on. As far as, to me, iconic writers for Saturday Night Live. And then, gosh, I love Anna Gasteyer so much. Do I save a spot for her? Yeah, like I wanted so bad to put Jack Handy on, but I'm torn between those three. And I think, kind of listening to you talk about it and lay it out, I don't know, Deremy, do you want to play like the, counter argument to me putting Jack Handy in my last spot? Like, what do you think?
I think Jack Handy, it's good to put him in that last spot. I really do. I think he's that writer who, like Thomas made the points, but just brought that sensibility and brought that funny and brought that uniqueness to that show. I think he's a writer that, when you think about like a golden era of writers in that time, like his name's always one of the first ones that you mention. And I think that says something to how important. So I think it's cool to have him on there.
And Ashley, Jack Handy's basically a New Mexican. So if that does anything, because he's lived in Santa Fe for a long time.
Wow,
so he's basically a New Mexican at this point.
Okay, done. That's it. I got it. I guess, although, do we need to ask him red or green? His answer to that may also,
we'll ask him red or green, and that might be. I'll see if I could get a hold of him, and then I'll let you know by the time voting ends.
Although, to be fair, I don't know that there's a wrong answer to red or green.
Yeah, that's a trick question sometimes. I don't know.
It is.
So Jack Handy, maybe, Ashley?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was one of those, I looked forward to Deep Thoughts being on that week's SNL. Like, I ended up looking forward to Digital Shorts being on by the Lonely Island. Like, if I saw that black screen that said a digital short, an SNL digital short pop up, I was like, oh my God, yes, my week is made. And it was the same thing of when I saw the little cursive start going across the screen and the little stock video of the couple like walking down the beach holding hands, my week was set. Like, I knew that it was going to be good because I was getting a Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. So, I think the nostalgia may be pushing me into it.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Oh, God, absolutely. No, talking about how, like, they would visit Uncle Caveman, and every now and then Uncle Caveman would eat one of them, and it wasn't until later that they found out that Uncle Caveman was a bear. Kind of things like that. Like, Jack Handy's sensibility. Like, I love those Deep Thoughts. Like, I'd like buy a book of Deep Thoughts. Like, yeah, that's, oh, man. So, yeah, Jack Handy's definitely on my list. Is there anybody, Ashley, left for you that you want to kind of hash out here with us?
Yeah, like I said, I had a few that I was really torn between, like I said, Adam McKay and Ana Gasteyer. I was really torn about putting them on. Ana Gasteyer, to me, is part of the Sherry O'Terry and Molly Shannon and just that epic group of women at that time who had such hilarious and iconic roles. I mean, obviously, we got Martha Stewart because of Ana Gasteyer and all the amazing things that she would do to parody, like her cooking naked, while doing her show and being completely serious and unbothered by it. To the Culps, being one half of the Culps with Will Ferrell, I think is such an iconic sketch as well that would make me laugh every single time. And to this day, if I'm near a microphone, I will say, we got a hot mic here. We got a hot mic going on. I mean, who doesn't, who watched that and doesn't do that when they're near a microphone now?
Yeah.
And so it was so hard, and I kept going back and forth. Like you said, this is such a challenging exercise because I would say almost all of the names that you presented deserve to be in the Hall of Fame at one point.
Yeah.
Or there's definitely a case to be made for almost all of them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we got the Adam McKay guy right here. Deremy did the Adam McKay episode with me.
Yes, I did.
So if you want, like, Deremy, if you have any thing to advocate as far as Adam McKay, I want to hear it.
Well, I think we've all, even throughout, talked about Will Ferrell's impact, and I think most people will have him as the GOAT. And we talk about that writer, we talk about how Mulaney and Bill Hader have that. Well, even like we've seen like what they did with the movie career, but before that, a lot of like what Will Ferrell did on SNL, that partnership with Adam McKay was showing. And a lot of those iconic sketches that we think about with Will Ferrell, he was doing that with Adam McKay. And also just the fast track that he got to being bumped to being head writer. It was like, I think what Tom's like a year, after like a year on the show, he was like the head writer. And also, once again, just like I said about Paul Appel and Molly Shannon, being a part of that crew in 95, 96 to help really bring the show back when, I think Lorne has said that was his toughest time as producer. And he was getting hit from the critics, getting hit from like network execs at NBC, and he really had to change the show up. And I credit a lot of people, but also people behind the screen like Adam McKay. So that's why that's the strong case I have for him.
And to show how highly Lorne thought of Adam McKay pulled a really great power move when he was going to leave SNL. He was going to leave, but he told Lorne, I'll only stay if I could have carte blanche to make these little short movies and have my own segment. And Lorne said, go for it.
Yeah.
So we saw these little weird movies that Adam McKay made, the digital shorts, honestly. Like these were the first digital shorts. That's where the Lonely Island guys got the digital short term, and even like the font and stuff was from like the Adam McKay shorts. Adam McKay had such sway and pull at SNL that Lorne said, okay, yeah, we'll give you your own segment. You can make these movies. And Deremy and I went through the Adam McKay shorts on our episode, and they were just wild. Some of them were so out there and just wild and funny. There was that one with the food pawn shop.
Mm-hmm. And with Buscemi, is that one with Buscemi in it?
Buscemi one.
That's such a great one.
The one with Ben Stiller, the H is O with Glenn Fry.
Oh,
that was
hilarious!
So Adam McKay's just had his own sensibility and stuff. So I think there's a strong case for Adam McKay. Anna Gasteyer too, one of my favorites as well around that era. So this is tough. I'm glad we're hashing this out here.
No, you're Ashley. You made a case because I do appreciate like those ladies who broke that crappy boys club thing. And I do think of that time. I think of Sherry O'Terry so highly and Molly Shannon. And what you just said about Anna Gasteyer, I'm like, wow, like I maybe haven't given her. I liked her, but I'm like, did I give her enough credit for what she did on SNL? So you're really making me rethink about her legacy. And like, man, I'm like, she's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, Deremy, who's the last one on your list?
The last one on my list is, I think so many people's favorite, I think a lock. And he's one of those people where you look at it in sports where you're like, wow, this person, yeah, like he's a great player. I know that. And then you start having like discussion. You're like, oh, he's like a top 20 player. And then you go, is this guy like one of the all-time greats?
Yeah.
And like, that's Will Forte for me, where it's just like, you're like, oh yeah, Will Forte's great. And then you start talking about it, you're like, oh, wow, he's even greater. And then it's like, is this dude like a top 10 guy? Like, he's just, and like, am I sleeping on Will Forte? Like, I like him, but like, just what his versatility, the sketches, what he was able to do, just from being the guy to be the king of that, 10-to-1 sketch that like he just personified that, but then to do like McGruber and that, to take that sketch and then to just build upon that and to making that like an SNL character that has its own movie, and just the versatility that he showed. He's the glue guy. He's the quirky, like strange guy. He's the established character person. Will Forte is someone I feel like people already put him in like the top 20, top 15. And I think like, it's weird to say he still could be underrated. And I think as time goes on, we could be bumping him up higher and higher on the all-time list.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. My two favorite cast members, probably just personal favorites, are Vanessa Bayer and Will Forte.
Yeah.
And Will Forte, because he had such a distinct voice. It was the oddball. It was the 10-to-1. He had his own lane on the show. Even to me, when the show was kind of slumping, I want to say around 2003, 2004, it was a little on a downswing. Will Forte was like the shining light. Like he was like that saving grace in some otherwise maybe down episodes. I knew that if a Will Forte sketch that was led by him, that was his sensibility, popped up, it was like the saving grace for me of an otherwise maybe kind of like era that I didn't totally love. And you're right, Deremy, like people know and love Will Forte and they say, oh no, he has his own lane, he has weird sense of humor. But then you go look, like the Falconer, he did a lot of great one-off sketches, like the Spelling Bee one. There's one, Duluth Live, where Jeff Montgomery with the Trick or Treater. You mentioned MacGruber. He has the Clancy T. Bachelorette, which he brought back when he hosted Locker Room Motivation with Peyton Manning,
Yeah.
Potato Chip Thief, like Greg Stink, like all these, like there's just a laundry list. I did the show with John Schneider, and we just like geeked out because there was so much to talk. Like there's so much meat on that bone to talk about. And so I think the combination of just quantity and quality and having a distinct voice, Will Forte is one of the all-time greats to me. And to me, he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer. And it's also an example of somebody who, I'm going to be quite frank with you, I thought his hosting gig was terrible. And I was looking forward to it, and I love Will Forte. And then I was at the end of the show, I was like, man, that was really bad. But it doesn't take what points away from me, though.
Right.
So we'll just ignore that part of it. Ashley, I hope you're a Will Forte fan. Maybe not as much as me and Deremy, but I'm curious to see where you stand on Will Forte.
Oh no, we used to talk about the Falconer after they came on, like back in the day.
Right.
Like that was our jam. You know, we bonded over the Falconer with Will Forte, and 100% agree. And like this is so random, but his ability to like loud whisper is oddly really impressive to me. Like the voices and the impressions that he does, and some of them where he just does that. It's the quietest and loudest whisper all at the same time, and it's just so impressive to me somehow. It's probably kind of random, but I always appreciated his ability to not just do impressions, but to kind of make his own characters and make his own voice associated with them. He also, I think, unfortunately played, kind of a pedophilia looking man a little bit too easily. And I think that may be off-putting to some voters, but don't let that deter you. Just focus on, MacGruber, and the Falconer
was a
and
little
all
too convincing, maybe.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, no, just I'm a huge Will Forte fan. MacGruber was definitely my favorite at the time. I'm pretty sure MacGruber and The Lonely Island got me through law school and kept me sane. So.
Yeah, and the
Aging
movie's
me.
wild
Definitely
too. We think the sketches
aging
are
me.
wild, but the movie MacGruber is so wild.
Oh, yeah.
Probably an extension of Will
And they
Forte's.
filmed it in New Mexico.
He did.
Another New
And-
Mexico connection.
And
They filmed MacGruber in Albuquerque mostly, but yeah.
A side note for me, and another sports reference, I love Charles Barkley. I think he's funny on Inside the NBA. Not my favorite host, but Will Forte did one of the impossible tasks. He made Charles Barkley seem funny in those MacGruber sketches where he, it's Daryl, but I still cracked up all the time. And I'm like, Barkley to me was not a good host, but Will Forte did something that was hard. Like he made Barkley funny to me. So another tip to Will Forte.
Yeah, Will Forte is just an all-timer. I think that was a good place to end. I don't think, by my count, Ashley and Deremy, you're all out of votes.
I'm
right?
out. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, so that's perfect to me. I think that's a very fitting one. Will Forte, honestly, had such a blast with John Schneider. Go re-listen to that if you haven't, because John Schneider just laid out the case perfectly, and there was so many sketches that Will Forte. We didn't even talk about. He worked with who I consider the GOAT, Will Ferrell, in a sketch called Pepper Grinder.
Yes.
Will Ferrell was hosting, and they just Will Forte and Will Ferrell, that was like a dream come true for me. Doing a completely weird, oddball sketch with the two of them, that was perfect, that Pepper Grinder sketch. So, so we did it, everybody. We shared our ballots. I think a lot to consider. Voting is open now until May 17th at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So we do have some time to kind of some of the things that were up in the air that weren't locks, but we were considering. We have some time to mull those over and potentially put them on the ballots or not. So, Ashley, thank you so much for coming back. You were my guest for Kate McKinnon. You did a great job today. Great conversations.
Thank you.
Took me back to over 20 years ago, like you said, when we would geek out about the Falconer and the Culps and all this SNL stuff. So that's so much fun. I don't know if there's anything you want to promote or say hi to anybody or.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Mom, stereotypically. And thanks so much for having me on. I have such a blast doing this. Like I said, it's always great when I'm with people who like to enjoy listening to me talk about SNL as much as I enjoy talking about it. So I had a blast.
Yeah, you were awesome. Thank you so much again for coming back. We'll probably see you again season 6 of the SNL Hall of Fame. We're doing another season, definitely. Gonna get the lineup here in a few weeks, and I'll definitely get a hold of you for that.
Awesome.
So, Deremy Dove, thank you so much again for joining me. Always great to have you here on the SNL Hall of Fame. What would you like to promote?
Thomas, it's always a pleasure when you and Jamie have me. I make sure to keep my feet clean, wipe them off when I get to come into the hallowed halls of the SNL Hall of Fame. And Ashley, it was just awesome chatting with you today, and not just because I got out of yard work, but it truly was a pleasure talking with both of you. So thank you so much. And to plug our show, Thomas, Pop Culture 5, where we look at anything in pop culture and we give our 5 essential, lists of that topic for the week. And a lot of people are liking it. And I know you feel the same way. We're just humbled and glad that people are liking it. And I love doing it with you. So thank you for that. And for those, you've heard us doing these sports references. I also do a sports history podcast, Bigger Than the Game, with Deremy and Jose. So me and my co-host Jose talk about a coach, a player, a game in sports history, and we connect the past to the present. So that's on all platforms too as well. Same with Pop Culture 5. So if you got, I know there's a lot of stuff out there, but if you have time and you like what we're doing here, please give those a listen as well. So yeah, just thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And thank you for being a great co-host on Pop Culture 5. And a little tease, SNL related tease here. I think we're cooking up a little something to coincide with the around the premiere of season 50 of SNL. So we're already looking ahead, kind of cooking something up a little bit at Pop Culture 5 to kind of coincide with the premiere of the 50th season of SNL. So
excited.
I'm excited about that. Thank you both so much for joining me. For the listeners out there, for the voters, you can register to vote if you haven't already at snlhof.com. If you're a past voter, Jamie will email a ballot to you. Voting is now open and will close on May 17th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you so much for listening. For Ashley Bauer and Deremy Dove, I'm Thomas Sena. See you next time on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNL HOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.